Candles in the reading room. Mr. Tresham arrived at Fenwick's circulating library at 4 minutes past 10, which told me he meant to close us with punctuality. His card bore trusty authority. His voice carried less mercy than good breeding. I might have disliked him at once, had he not set one borrowed book upon my desk, with a blue recommendation slip still tucked inside. My own words faced me from the margin. His answer waited beneath them. He was Larkspur. Chapter 1. The Inspection at Fenwick's. Mr. Tresham did not notice at once that I had recognized him. That was useful. Recognition is a dangerous substance. In the wrong room, under the wrong witness, it may stain faster than ink. He stood on the far side of my subscription desk with his hat beneath one arm, his gloves still on, and the expression of a man who had come prepared to find evidence of disorder and intended to be disappointed by nothing so inconvenient as order. Behind him, the front bell trembled once more from his entrance, then settled into silence. The morning room of Fenwick's circulating library did not. It breathed around him. Miss Araminta Bell, who had been pretending to examine travel memoirs for 20 minutes while waiting for the rain to ease, lowered the wrong book by half an inch. Mrs. Valacourt, who always occupied the chair nearest the fire because she claimed the right by age, deafness, and a subscription paid 2 quarters in advance, looked over her spectacles. In the alcove beyond the lending shelves, Miss Pike the governess went very still with a volume of sermons open in her lap and one gloved thumb marking a place I doubted was devotional. Men entered the library often enough in daylight. Fathers, brothers, husbands, elderly uncles sent to fetch parcels. One retired naval captain who read sentimental poetry and dared the world to object. But men who carried trusty authority in their waistcoat pocket altered the air differently. They reminded every woman present that a room may feel like refuge and still belong, by law or lease, to someone else. I kept my hand flat on the blue recommendation slip. Mr. Tresham, I said. Mrs. Fenwick. His bow was correct, not warm, not insultingly cold, a perfect middle distance, which told me far more about him than either rudeness or charm would have done. My gaze dropped again, despite myself, to the book he had placed upon the desk. A History of Northern Roads and Post Routes, dry thing. Brown binding. One torn corner at the lower board. I remembered wrapping it myself 3 weeks earlier because the gentleman who borrowed under the name Larkspur had asked, by slip, whether practical books ever confessed more longing than poetry. I had replied only when the reader has learned to hear travel as deprivation. Below my words, in a lean dark hand, he had written, "Then you must forgive me for preferring maps. They are the only romances that admit distance honestly." I had read that line twice when the book returned. Then a third time, which was foolish. A woman who manages a library ought not become attached to unknown men through marginal wit, especially not when unknown men pay promptly and never linger. Now the unknown man stood before me with a trustee's card and the power to close my doors. I moved the slip beneath my ledger. "You requested an inspection," I said. I had not understood it would be immediate. That is the common advantage of inspection. To the inspector. Perhaps. His eyes sharpened. They were gray, not cold exactly, though they had the habit of appearing so while he decided whether warmth would be useful. His face was not handsome in the careless way Bath liked to reward with attention. It was better made than that, composed by restraint, dark hair brushed with severity, a mouth that looked as if it knew irony but refused to spend it cheaply, and the tired steadiness of a man who had learned to stand between other people in consequence until both sides resented him for it. "I was told," he said, "that your operating hours have extended beyond those permitted under the Crescent Room's lease. And did the lease show you the difference between a reading hour, a return hour, and a lady too frightened to step into the street while drunk gentlemen leave the card rooms?" Mrs. Valacourt's needles stopped clicking near the fire. Mr. Tresham glanced once toward the occupied chairs, not an embarrassment, in measure. "We need not discuss operational irregularities before your subscribers. Then we need not make accusations before them either." Bah! The slight pause that followed pleased me more than it ought. Not because I had silenced him, I had not, because he had noticed the distinction. "I have made no accusation," he said. "No, you have brought one folded in your coat." He regarded me for one breath longer than a gentleman properly should regard a woman whose business he had come to inspect. Then he drew a paper from his inner pocket and placed it on the desk beside the returned book. A formal complaint. I knew it before reading the first line. Papers of that kind have a smell even when clean, committee language, moral concern, and someone else's ink arranged to look like public virtue. I unfolded it. The charges were exactly as expected and therefore worse than interesting. Improper late admission. Mixed company of unsuitable female subscribers. Circulation of questionable titles. Failure to maintain distinctions necessary to reputation. Possible injury to the good name of the Crescent Rooms. Possible injury. How carefully cowardice writes when it borrows morality's coat. I read to the bottom. No direct signature. Only. Submitted by concerned subscribers and guardians of the rooms standing. Anonymous, I said. Collected by the trustee committee. That does not make it less anonymous. It only gives anonymity better furniture. His mouth moved by a fraction, not a smile. The grave prevention of one. You take the complaint lightly. No, I take anonymous guardians lightly. A complaint can ruin a woman. The men who write them ought at least to risk their own names. A Miss Pike's head lifted in the alcove. Poor girl. Governesses hear certain sentences as if they were doors they have never seen open. Mr. Tresham removed his gloves slowly, finger by finger. It was not affectation. He was buying time to master irritation, or perhaps something less simple. Mrs. Fenwick, he said, I am not here to debate the philosophy of anonymous complaint. A pity. We might have begun with agreement and surprised each other. Nor am I here as your enemy. That was a sentence men often used when arriving with power enough to do harm and preference enough to dislike being blamed for it. Then in what capacity are you here? A's acting trustee for the Crescent Rooms, which means my landlord's hand with your conscience attached. Which means, he said, and now the coldness in him became more deliberate, that if this library endangers the room's reputation, I have authority to suspend the lease pending full committee review. Ah, the room heard that. No one gasped. Gasps belong to novels and girls encouraged to helplessness. In real rooms, women simply become very still. Pages stop turning. Thread stops moving. Breath hides. I hated him for making them hear it. I hated him more because his face showed that he knew exactly what had happened and did not enjoy it. I folded the complaint along its original crease. Then, Inspect, I said. His brows drew together. Now, you came with punctuality. We must not disappoint it. Mrs. Valancourt resumed her knitting with such pointed force that the needles clicked like tiny legal objections. Mr. Tresham looked past me to the wall of shelves behind the desk. I will require your subscription ledger, circulation list, current catalog, after-hours register, and lease copy. You may see the catalog and the lease copy. The subscription ledger contains private names. It is precisely those names the committee may need to understand. No, I said. The word landed rather nakedly between us. He did not look accustomed to plain refusal. To his credit, he did not mistake it for hysteria. No. You may review categories of membership, fee structure, hours, complaints, titles, and room usage. You may not use a moral panic to collect the names of women who trusted this room because it did not report them to men. His eyes changed. Only slightly, but enough that I saw the first true fracture in his official purpose. Then he said, if the ledger proves your respectability, why withhold it? Because a respectable woman is not made safer by being inventoried. The sentence came out sharper than Prudence advised. Miss Bell shut her book entirely. Mr. Tresham noticed. So did I. And now the library had become exactly what the complaint wished to make it. A room in which every ordinary thing carried meaning because a man with authority had asked to see what belonged to women. He lowered his voice. You do understand that refusal may be treated as non-cooperation? Yes. And that non-cooperation may strengthen the case against you. Only if the case was too weak to stand without punishing resistance. For the first time, he looked at me not as a trustee addressing a difficult proprietor, nor even as Larkspur discovering that the person behind the slips had a face. Part of him that had been waiting inconvenient to be struck. It lasted one heartbeat. Then he became official again. I will begin with the catalog. Of course, I drew the large catalog volume from beneath the desk and placed it before him. He opened it. His hand paused at once. There, tucked into the inner board where I had forgotten it after the last update, lay another blue slip, not his. Mine, a draft answer never sent. Larkspur, you asked whether women read differently when no one watches. The answer is yes. But not because we are different creatures in secret. Because being unwatched is the first condition under which many women discover they have been thinking all along. He read enough before I could remove it. Not all. Enough. His fingers remained resting on the page. A lesser man might have pretended not to have seen. A more charming one might have smiled. Mr. Tresham did neither. He looked up slowly. That was for me. The room around us seemed to draw breath through all its paper at once. I took the slip from the catalog, folded it once, and placed it in my pocket. It was for a borrower, I said. I am that borrower. Knew, I said, though my voice had gone quieter. You were. A line appeared between his brows. And now? No, you are the man sent to decide whether the room that answered you is fit to remain open. He had no quick reply to that. Good. Outside, a carriage rolled past on wet stone. Inside, the fire settled. The shelves held their breath. And every woman in Fenwick's pretended very hard not to know that something private had just become dangerously visible. Mr. Tresham closed the catalog with one careful hand. Then I had better begin accurately, he said. I did not trust the sentence, but I heard beneath it the first crack in the order he had brought through my door. Accuracy, I have found, is most often demanded by those who expect it to serve their own conclusion. Mr. Tresham began at the catalog because I had put it before him, but his attention did not remain obedient to paper for long. He turned pages with care, noting lending classes, acquisition dates, the little marks by volumes requiring repair, and the separate column I kept for books too fragile to leave the room. His face gave nothing away. That was irritating. Men who disapprove loudly may be answered. Men who read in silence require one to wait. I dislike waiting when my livelihood is beneath a man's hand. At last he said, your catalog is wider than the committee was led to expect. That is often the case when committees raid summaries instead of books. His eyes lifted. I kept my face mild. He looked back down. The complaint mentions novels of a questionable character. Which character? I beg your pardon. The novel's character or the reader's? Mrs. Valancourt gave one decisive click of her needles. Approval, perhaps. Or rheumatism. Mr. Tresham closed the catalogue halfway. You know what is meant. I know what is usually meant. That a woman's mind may be endangered by any sentence she enjoys too much. That is not my position. No, it is only the position you are here to enforce. A small silence followed, shaped very much like a warning. He opened the catalogue again. Do you carry political pamphlets, radical essays, French material, grammar, devotional extracts, 2 travel accounts, and 1 very dull history of roads? His glance flicked to the return volume between us. I should not have enjoyed that. I did. And novels, he asked. Many. Of all kinds. Of the kinds I judge useful to my subscribers. That is a wide power to grant yourself. It is my library. Under lease. Under lease, not under confession. His mouth tightened at that, though not with anger alone. He was beginning to hear the room around the argument, and that made him less comfortable. Good. A man inspecting a library ought to know the shelves are not the only things that listen. He turned another page. You keep separate hours. I keep ordinary public hours, return hours, reading room hours, and by arrangement, late admission for subscribers who cannot come safely or respectably at other times. Dear it is. Dear what is? The irregularity. Irregular to whom? To the lease. The lease says the room shall not be used for public gatherings after 9, and we do not gather publicly after 9. But you admit women, by individually, to read, to return, borrow, write, copy, wait for safer weather, avoid being followed, escape a lodging house quarrel, sit by a fire, receive a letter, or, on one occasion, cry over a book of sermons because grief has poor taste in vessels. He was silent. I ought not to have said the last. It made the room too alive. In the alcove, Miss Pike lowered her eyes to her book again, though she had not turned a page in several minutes. I knew whose grief had sat with the sermon, so did she. Mr. Tresham did not. That was the point. He looked toward the alcove, then to the small table where 2 girls from a dressmaker's rooms copied passages from a geography primer under the pretense of selecting books for a mistress who would never know they had read a line for themselves. One was the better hand, the other mouthed difficult words silently before writing them down. Near the fire, Mrs. Valancourt sat like a monument to female permission earned through age, money, and the refusal to die at anyone's convenience. In the corner by the east shelf, Mrs. Underhill, a companion of excellent manners and no independent income, had been pretending for a quarter hour that she did not need the envelope I had placed beneath a volume of Cowper. These were not indecent women. That, to men like the anonymous complainants, was precisely the problem. Indecency may be condemned and put out. Necessity asks why the door was locked in the first place. Mr. Tresham said, more quietly, you admit non-subscribers. I admit women for whom a full subscription would be impossible and humiliation unnecessary. On whose account? Mind. Financially unwise. Legally vulnerable. Socially reckless. Only if one believes women of different stations contaminate each other by sitting under the same roof. You know that is not what I said. I know it is what other people will say while thanking you for giving it administrative shape. His face hardened. You have a talent for placing my words in the ugliest possible company. I did not invite your words there, Mr. Tresham. I found them already seated. That was too much. I knew it at once. Not because he flared, but because he did not. The colder men become when genuinely struck, the more care is required. He closed the catalogue and set one palm upon it. Mrs. Fenwick, he said. This room may mean what you believe it means. It may even do some good, but sentiment does not alter liability. If a woman leaves here after dark and is seen followed, insulted, or worse, who answers for the scandal? The man who follows insults or worse. In sermons, perhaps, not in Bath. The answer was so plain, so immediate, and so bitterly true that it stopped me. He saw it, and because he was not merely an official fool, he did not press advantage with satisfaction. Instead he said, you think I came here eager to close you. You came prepared to. That is a narrower difference than you imagine. No. He looked across the room again, this time less as inspector than witness. It is the difference between intention and duty. Duty has ruined more women than intention ever found courage to attempt. A Miss Bell made a small sound at that and pretended it was a cough. Mr. Tresham heard it. His gaze moved from her to Mrs. Valancourt, then to the 2 dressmakers' girls, then to Miss Pike in the alcove. He was seeing them now not as evidence in a complaint, but as persons who would remember whether he had spoken of them as risk, nuisance, or need. A good begin enough. He returned to me. Show me the late register. His brows rose. Again, the register contains names and times. I am not asking out of curiosity. No man ever is, once he has a reason large enough to dignify it. Mrs. Fenwick, Mr. Tresham. The room had gone very quiet. Too quiet. A room cannot remain in such tension without some being made example. Alley, fool, or witness. I chose witness. Miss Pike, I said gently, would you be so kind as to bring me the grey return ledger from the alcove table? The governess froze. I hated myself a little for drawing her forward. Yet if I kept speaking in generalities, Mr. Tresham could continue arguing in authorities. He needed a human edge placed against the rule. Miss Pike rose with the obedient terror of women employed in households where even walking at the wrong moment may become character evidence. She brought the ledger to the desk and set it down. "Thank you," I said. "You need not remain." That she deprised me. Then she lifted her chin, "Not far but enough. If it concerns the evening entries, ma'am, I do not mind." Mr. Tresham looked at her properly then. "You use the late hours." A flush spread up her throat. "Only when my pupils are asleep and Mrs. Hadley has no calls for me. And your employer permits this." Her mouth tightened. "There. The answer perfectly legible," I said. "Miss Pike borrows educational works." "I did not ask you," he said. "No." Miss Pike said quickly before I could answer with more temper than wisdom. "Mrs. Hadley does not permit it. She says a governess with too many notions becomes troublesome. I come when I can." Mr. Tresham's face changed. The shift was small but real, not pity. He was too controlled for pity to show so crudely. It was recognition of the sort a man resents because it makes his task less clean. "And if your name appears in a trustee report?" I asked him. Miss Pike's hands tightened on the ledger. He looked down at them. The point had entered the room. "I would not expose her name," he said. "Would you expose her category? Her hour? Enough for a clever mistress to guess. Enough for a servant to carry home. Enough for a committee to congratulate itself on discretion while ruining her in outline." His jaw set. Miss Pike whispered, "Please." That single word defeated 3 pages of committee language. Mr. Tresham removed his hand from the catalogue. "I will not require the names today." Today, I caught the limit. So did he. So perhaps did every woman in the room. "You will not require them at all unless there is a formal legal proceeding," I said. "And if there is one, I will contest it before handing over a list of women whose only offense was entering a lit room to read." His eyes met mine. "Are you always this difficult?" The answer seemed to catch him. "Only when I am correct," I said. At the fire, Mrs. Valancourt gave a noise so close to a laugh that she disguised it by dropping a stitch and blaming the yarn. Mr. Tresham looked as though he regretted having noticed. I opened the grey ledger myself and turned it so he could see without reading names. My system was simple because it had to be. Initials for late returns. Category marks only for internal management. No full addresses. No employer names. No servants' hall gossip translated in neat columns for male convenience. He studied the page. "You designed this to conceal identity. I designed it to protect proportion. Meaning a woman returning a novel at 9:30 because the kitchen stairs were finally empty is not the same matter as a public assembly, whatever the hour says." He turned another page. "They are symbols." "What do they mean?" He almost sighed. "You refuse many ordinary questions. They are not ordinary if the answer can injure someone absent." He stayed over the ledger a moment longer. "And the blue marks." I did not answer quickly enough. His eyes sharpened. The blue marks were mine. Small dots beside women who required more than books. Referral to a dressmaker willing to pay fair copy rates, a safe letter direction, quiet translation work, information about charitable coal, the name of a physician who would not laugh at female pain. None of it illegal. Much of it socially inconvenient. He understood before I spoke. Not the details, but the existence of another layer. "Not merely books," he said. "Network. A room." I corrected. "Do not make it grander than it is. Grandeur frightens men into committees." The corner of his mouth almost moved again. He suppressed it. Then the library door opened. A sharp gust of wet air entered first, followed by a young woman in a dark pelisse, bonnet veil lowered. One hand pressed to her side, as if walking had cost her more than the distance warranted. She stopped upon seeing Mr. Tresham at the desk. Every woman in the room understood at once what men often learn later and call instinct. She had not come for a book. I stepped from behind the desk. "Mrs. Lyle," I said, too warmly and therefore too tellingly. Her eyes darted from me to Mr. Tresham. "I can return another time." "No," I said. "You may come in." Mr. Tresham did not move, but his attention fixed upon her with dangerous precision. Not suspicion. Concern, perhaps. Or duty, which in men of his sort sometimes wears the same coat until one sees what it does with its hands. Mrs. Lyle crossed the threshold. Beneath the edge of her veil, the left side of her mouth was swollen. I heard Miss Pike inhale. So did Mr. Tresham. The complaint lay still on my desk between us, accusing the room of admitting women at improper hours. Mrs. Lyle's gloved fingers shook around the book she held out to me. It was not from my shelves. Inside it, I knew, would be a note. I took the volume. "Mrs. Lyle has a standing arrangement with me," I said before he could ask. His gaze remained on the bruise she had tried and failed to hide. "I see that." "No," I said softly, because now softness cut more cleanly than anger. "You see only what came through the door. You have not yet decided whether you will see why the door must remain." The library held its breath. Mr. Tresham looked from Mrs. Lyle to the women watching from every shelf, shadowed corner of the room. Then at last he looked back at me. For the first time since he had entered, trusty authority did not sit easily upon him. "Good, let it chafe." Mrs. Lyle's book was not a book at all, not in the way Mr. Tresham would have meant the word while composing a report for trustees. It was a hollowed volume of sermons with the center cut cleanly enough to shame many binders and the cavity lined in plain paper. Inside lay a folded note, 3 shillings. and a small brass key wrapped in muslin. Mr. Tresham saw the hollow. Of course he did. Men who are trained to examine evidence become tiresome in rooms that survive by the grace of what goes politely unseen. Mrs. Lyle's fingers tightened around the reticule at her wrist. She was not old. Not yet 30. Her gown had been chosen carefully enough to appear respectable and cheaply enough to say she had little money of her own. The veil hid the worst of the bruise until she turned toward the window, where the gray light found it the cruelty of truth. Mrs. Fenwick, she whispered. I am sorry. I did not know there would be a trustee, I supplied. Her eyes flicked toward Mr. Tresham. The room remained still, but it had changed from witness to shield. Miss Pike stood half beside the alcove table, as if ready to move and uncertain by what authority. Mrs. Valancourt knitted without looking down. Miss Bell had put her travel memoir aside entirely and stared at the window with such exaggerated disinterest that only a fool would have believed her uninvolved. Mr. Tresham was not a fool. That was the trouble, he said quietly. Madam, if you have been harmed— No, Mrs. Lyle said at once. The speed of the answer told its own account. He heard it. His face tightened. No one asked you, she added, then flushed with fear at her own sharpness. Forgive me. He bowed, very slightly. There is nothing to forgive. That was well done. Not enough, but well done. I took the hollow book, closed it, and set it beneath the desk. Mrs. Lyle, you may wait in the back room. I cannot stay long. You may stay as long as the room is open. And after. That question did what the complaint had failed to do. It exposed the whole structure of the matter in one breath. After the reading hour, after the lease clause, after the street lamps were lit, after husbands expected doors locked from the inside and wives obediently placed where household authority could find them, after committees went home congratulating themselves on order while women measured bruises against weather gossip, servants' loyalty, and the cost of a chair by a fire. Mr. Tresham looked at me. I looked back. There are some victories that arrived too early. I had wanted him to understand the library. I had not wanted Mrs. Lyle's face to become the lesson. You may stay after, I said. Mrs. Lyle shut her eyes for one instant. Mr. Tresham said, that is precisely the practice under complaint, and precisely the practice you will not cease. Also, yes, even if it costs you the lease, especially then. He absorbed that in silence. The trouble with intelligent men is that they do not always resist truth because they fail to see it. Sometimes they resist because they see its cost faster than one wishes. I turned to Miss Pike. Will you take Mrs. Lyle through? Quietly. The governess nodded and came forward. Mrs. Lyle followed her toward the narrow door beside the lending shelves, and as she passed Mr. Tresham, he stepped back. Not much, enough to give her space without performing generosity, a minor decency. I marked it against him unwillingly. When the door closed behind them, the whole front room seemed to breathe again, though not easily. Mr. Tresham looked at the hollow sermon book beneath my desk. You hide women here. I receive subscribers. That is not an answer. It is the answer suitable for a trusty report, and unsuitable for the truth. The truth is not always safe in the hands of men who arrive with paper authority. His gaze sharpened. You mistake me. No, I said. I classify you as unproven. The Mrs. Valancourt made a small approving sound and pretended to clear her throat. Mr. Tresham heard that too. I almost pitied him. A man may command a committee and still find himself outnumbered by old women with wool. He drew a breath, then let it out slowly. Mrs. Fenwick, do you understand what may happen if I write that this room is being used as informal shelter? I understand what may happen if you write it badly. And if I write it accurately. That would depend on whether your accuracy includes the men who make shelter necessary. The silence that followed did not belong to anger. It belonged to recognition coming too close. His hand rested on the Return Post Road book, a history of northern roads and post roads. Larkspur's book. My book, in the dangerous private geography of slips and replies. He looked down at it, and perhaps because neither of us wished to speak of Mrs. Lyle for one more second, he opened it. The blue slip remained where I had first seen it, tucked near the rear board, the one with my old answer and his line about maps. He did not touch it at first. Then he said, without looking up, how many readers do you answer this way? Many. How many under flower names? That is not your question. But his fingers moved to the slip. No, it is not. He drew it free. My pulse behaved foolishly. Nothing in the room justified it. A man holding a paper he had already written upon should not have had the effect of a hand at one's wrist. He read his own line, then mine. Only when the reader has learned to hear travel as deprivation, his face altered before he could prevent it. Not sentiment, not vanity, recognition, yes, but not merely of handwriting. Of the private mind that had met him in the margin before his name entered my ledger under threat. You knew before I gave my card, he said. 1. When you placed the book on my desk, and still you let me proceed as trustee. You had proceeded as trustee before I understood you were Larkspur. He folded the slip once, carefully, as if a crease placed wrong might alter what had passed between us. That name was chosen in idleness. His gaze lifted. Men choose aliases carelessly when they mean to be hidden, I said. They choose them precisely when they mean not to be known too plainly. The corner of his mouth almost moved. And you concluded which of me? That you wish to think without being useful to anyone. The answer reached him. I saw it. For one instant he was not trusty, not family representative, not the reasonable man sent to close a troublesome female room. He was the unseen reader who had once asked whether a person could miss a place he had never had permission to enter. Then the front bell rang. We both turned. A boy stood in the doorway with rain on his cap and a sealed note in his hand. For Mr. Tresham, he said. The seal was not official. Too small, too hurried. Mr. Tresham took it, broke it, and read. Whatever softness recognition had brought to his face left at once. What is it? I asked before remembering I had no right. He looked toward the back room door where Mrs. Lyle had gone. Rosamond, he said. The name meant nothing to most of the room. It meant something to him. My sister has been warned not to be seen entering the Crescent rooms while your review is open. Be whom? His eyes returned to the note. By the mother of the gentleman expected to call on her tomorrow. There it was. The complaint had already crossed from library to marriage prospects. From books to women's market value. From my door to his sister future. Mr. Tresham folded the note. The official man came back over him like a coat put on too quickly. We must continue the inspection. No, I said. His expression hardened. Mrs. Fenwick, we must begin it properly. He stared at me for a moment. Then, slowly, he looked around the room, the desk, the shelves, the women pretending not to listen, the back door behind which Mrs. Lyle waited, the hollow sermon book beneath my hand, the blue slip between his fingers, and the complaint lying open like a bad promise. What do you mean by properly? I mean, I said, the het you stop inspecting the library as if the danger begins here. The boy at the door shifted from one foot to the other. Mr. Tresham slipped the blue recommendation slip into his coat pocket. He should not have done that. Or perhaps he should have done nothing else. Very well, he said. Show me where you believe it begins. I did not take Mr. Tresham first to the back room. That would have been the expected route, the obvious route, the compassionate route, perhaps, if one believed the library's entire defense could be built from Mrs. Lyle's swollen mouth and the quiet terror of a woman asking where she might stay after hours. But obvious truths are easily reduced to exceptions. One injured wife, one troubled household, one tender-hearted widow, proprietor overstepping the proper function of a circulating library. A committee could survive that. Men with rules always have a drawer prepared for exceptions. So I led him instead to the door beside the west shelves. It looked ordinary enough, painted cream, brass handle, no sign above it, no invitation. Most subscribers knew it led only to the internal passage between Fenwick's and the other rooms in the Crescent building. The corridor allowed servants to carry coal candles, waste paper, trays, or messages without forcing every practical act through the public entrance. In good weather, I kept it locked. In bad weather, or when a woman needed to leave without being observed from the street, I sometimes did not. Mr. Tresham noticed the key already turned in the lock. You use this passage. Occasionally. For late departures, or for safer departures. His eyes held mine for a moment, and I could almost see the official objection forming Lee's boundary, access responsibility, security risk, improper circulation between rooms. Then he glanced toward the back door where Mrs. Lyle waited and swallowed the objection whole. A beginning. I opened the door. The passage beyond was narrow and dim, warmed badly by the library on one side and cooled too well by the outer wall on the other. It smelled of waxed, damp stone, coal dust, and men's tobacco, though no man from my rooms smoked there. A strip of carpet ran along the center, worn thin where feet passed often enough and silently enough to prefer not being counted. Mr. Tresham stepped in behind me. The library door closed, and the women's room vanished into muffled quiet. The absence of it struck harder than I expected. Behind us had been paper, fire, watching eyes, female breath. Before us lay the service artery of a respectable building, doors without faces, sounds without owners, practical darkness in which reputations were not meant to notice themselves being moved. This passage is shared, he asked. Yes, by the library, the committee office, 2 retiring rooms, the old music chamber, and the private supper room beyond the card rooms. The private supper room is not part of your lease. Then why show it to me? Because if one wishes to blame smoke, it is useful to find the fire. He said nothing. We moved down the passage. At the first door, I paused but did not open it. Committee office, I said. Locked by daylight, apparently sacred by evening, though papers come and go from it with more energy than scripture ever enjoys. Apparently. I have not been invited to inspect it. He said dryly. I imagine not. At the second door came a faint sound, porcelain against saucer, then a woman's laugh cut too quickly in half. Not a subscriber's laugh, not a servant's either. A performance of ease, interrupted by the knowledge that ease had witnesses. Mr. Tresham heard it, his jaw set. That is the old music chamber, I said. It was hired twice last week under the name of a charitable subscription circle. And was it charitable? Perhaps. A certain sort of man always believes himself generous when he pays for silence. He turned his head toward me. I gave him no smile. The statement was not wit. Not here. A floorboard creaked beyond the music room door. Then a man's voice murmured something too low to catch. A second laugh followed, thinner than the first. Mr. Tresham's face had changed by the time we passed on. He had entered my library looking for irregularity. Now irregularity had put on boots and begun walking beside him. At the third door I stopped. "This one opens to the stair by Trimble Lane," I said. "It is not the main entrance. It is not watched from Milsom Street. When a woman leaves through here at the right hour, no one sees her unless someone has come to wait." His gaze went to the lock. "As someone, how often? Names?" I looked at him. He exhaled once through his nose. "No names. Very well. Descriptions. Gentlemen servants, young men who have no business standing in wet alleys at 10 o'clock. Once a creditor. Twice a husband. Once a man who claimed to have mistaken the door and then returned on 3 separate evenings to remain mistaken." "Did you report it?" "To whom?" "To the building trustees. I wrote twice." "He still meet." "I will." His face had gone hard in a new way. "Not against me." That was something. We turned at the passage bend, where the walls narrowed before the private supper room. Here the smell of tobacco strengthened. Beneath it came wine, orange peel, candle grease, and the sour trace of spilled spirits wiped badly from wood. Voices traveled under the door in low male bursts. It was barely 11 in the morning. The supper room should have been empty. Mr. Tresham looked at the door, then at me. "Is it in use now?" "Apparently." "Who has the booking?" "I am not given those lists." "Who keeps them?" "Mr. Pike for the building accounts. Or Mr. Hale when accounts prefer to become vague." "I know Mr. Hale." "Then perhaps you may ask him why charity circles require claret before noon." A man laughed inside the room. Another said, clearly enough to reach us, "The library widow will be gone by Michaelmas if Tresham has a spine. Then the passage is ours again." Mr. Tresham did not move. Neither did I. The sentence hung there, not merely incriminating but wonderfully impolite. Men speak most honestly when they believe the wall agrees with them. A chair scraped. Glass struck wood. Another voice said, "Careful. Too much noise and the bookends will flutter." Bookends. I felt my face heat, not with shame, with a familiar, cold fury sharpened by the stupidity of men who thought contempt made them invisible. Mr. Tresham put one hand to the door. I caught his wrist before he could open it. The contact shocked us both. His skin was warm beneath my glove. Too warm. Real in away slips, books, complaints, and trusty authority had not been. His eyes dropped to my hand on him, then rose to mine. For one suspended second, the whole passage narrowed to that improper point, my fingers around the wrist of the man who might close my doors. I released him at once. "Not that way," I whispered. His voice came lower. "Well, not. Because if you enter now, they will become surprised gentlemen at cards. Offended by misunderstanding, amused by female imagination, you will have noise, not proof." I heard them. "You are one man. I am acting trustee." "Then act like one who intends to win, not one who intends to feel clean for 30 seconds. That struck him. His hand fell from the door. A muscle moved in his cheek. "What do you propose?" "That you return to the library, continue your inspection, and write nothing final today." I stared at him. "No. No," he said. "Nothing final this week." I had no answer ready for that. He looked toward the supper room door again, and when he spoke, his voice held no heat, only decision. "I will issue a temporary review stay. The lease remains active. Ours continue under observation. No closure pending full trustee inquiry. Under observation." There it was. Help with arena attached. I ought to have been grateful. I was partly. Gratitude is not pure when one is tired of needing reprieves from men who just discovered the obvious. And the late hours. His gaze returned to me. "Continue," he said after a pause. "But recorded in category, not name. No woman enters through the Trimble Lane stair alone if risk is known. If a safe escort is needed, you send to me." I almost laughed, quietly because of the door. "To you. You imagine frightened women will apply to a male trustee for discreet escort. I imagine," he said, "that you will not hesitate to use a resource merely because you dislike its owner." That was unfair. It was also not wrong. I folded my arms. "And what do you receive in exchange for this temporary refusal to destroy my livelihood?" "Access." "To what?" "To your formal complaint copies, your prior letters to the trustees, corridor incident notes, room use dates, and anything else that shows this campaign was arranged to clear the passage rather than cleans the shelves. And my subscriber names." I watched him closely. He held the answer without flinching. "No," he repeated. "Not unless a court or formal magistrate requires them. And even then I will fight the question before it reaches your ledger." The promise entered me before I could stop it. Dangerous thing, a promise that answers exactly where one expected pressure. From beyond the supper room door came another burst of laughter. Lower now, more muffled. Someone had likely leaned close over the table. Someone else said, "Pake will handle the woman. He always does." Mr. Tresham's eyes darkened. "Pake," he said. "Possibly not Miss Pike's relation," I said, though the thought had already struck me and turned my stomach. "Possibly." A silence passed. Then he stepped back from the supper room door and gestured for me to precede him. We returned along the passage without speaking. By the time I unlocked the library door, my hand was steadier than I felt. The room looked up as one body. Mrs. Valacourt saw my face and then his. Miss Bell looked from his gloves to my pocket, where the draft slip still rested unseen. The two dressmakers' girls bent over their copywork with the desperation of people who know history has brushed past them and wish not to be noticed by it. From the back room, no sound came from Mrs. Lyle. Mr. Tresham crossed to the desk. He picked up the formal complaint, folded it once, and put it in his coat. "This library will not be suspended today," he said. Mrs. Valancourt dropped 3 stitches at once. Miss Bell looked as if she might cry and considered it undignified to do so in public. I stood behind the desk because it was the safest place to put my knees. Mr. Tresham continued, "The trustee review remains open. Mrs. Fenwick will provide operational records excluding subscriber names. Late hour usage is to continue under stricter safety notation pending inquiry into adjacent room access," Mrs. Valancourt said. "Adjacent room access. The innocent old hawk." Mr. Tresham turned to her and bowed slightly. "A building matter, madam. Most wickedness is." At first, he did not know what to do with that. I did not help him. He looked back to me. "Mrs. Fenwick, I will return this evening after the public hours close." A tremor went through the room that was not quite shock and not quite gossip, but would become both if given an hour. I said very clearly, "For the corridor records," and with a servant or clerk. His face sharpened. Then he understood the question, and something like respect moved through the irritation. "With my clerk," he said. "And my sister, if she insists on making the matter worse for me, which she likely will." That startled a laugh from Miss Bell before she could stop it. Even Mrs. Valancourt looked amused. The room eased by 1 notch, only 1. Enough. Mr. Tresham picked up his hat. The return post road book still lay on my desk. He touched it once, then withdrew his hand. "May I renew this?" he asked. A ridiculous question, an absurdly formal question given all that had passed. My throat tightened in a manner I dislike very much. "You are still a subscriber," I said. "For now. For as long as you return what you borrow." His eyes held mine. Then, from beneath the desk, the hollow sermon book gave a small sound. Not the book itself. The brass key inside it, shifting as someone moved in the back room beyond. Mrs. Lyle, perhaps standing. Perhaps afraid she had stayed too long. Perhaps already measuring whether after was safe. Mr. Tresham heard it. So, did a library's reprieve. Suddenly, did not feel like victory. It felt like a door held open by one hand while another tried the lock from the dark side. He bowed. "To-night, then." "Wes," I said. "To-night." He left with the complaint in his pocket, my blue slip hidden somewhere under his coat, and the first real uncertainty I had seen in his step. When the bell settled behind him, Mrs. Valancourt said, without looking up from her ruined knitting, "Well, that man is trouble." I looked at the closed door. "Yes," I said. But for the first time that morning, I was not entirely certain he was only mine. Chapter 2 slips beneath the rules. 3 subscription cards lay on my desk by 6 o'clock, each returned in a different hand and each saying the same thing with varying degrees of cohortus. Mrs. Everleigh regretted that her daughter would be unable to continue her reading for the present season, owing to a delicate throat. Miss Camber's aunt had decided the walk to Fenwick's was too exposed in unsettled weather, though she had survived Bath rain for 14 years without suspecting it of moral influence. Lady Merriweather's note was the briefest and therefore the most honest. "Until matters at the Crescent Rooms are clarified, I think it prudent to suspend our subscription." Prudent. If respectable society ever runs out of that word, half its cruelties will have to go naked. I placed the 3 cards in a row beside the day ledger and looked at them until my irritation became useful enough to be written down. Withdrawals following complaint circulation 3. All from higher fee subscribers. All female household decisions framed as health, weather, or prudence. No direct accusation named. Mrs. Valancourt watched me from the fireside, where she had reassembled her ruined knitting into something that might, with divine assistance, still become a shawl. "Bad?" she asked. "Not fatal. People always say that when counting wounds. I am counting subscriptions. Same practice, different ink." She was not wrong. The public hours had ended 10 minutes earlier. Though the room had not emptied in the manner an ordinary lending room is meant to empty. Ordinary lending rooms close by taking in books, straightening chairs, locking drawers, and trusting that whoever leaves has somewhere proper to go. Fenwick's did not have that luxury. Miss Pike sat at the back table with 2 copybooks open before her, writing out French exercises for the girls she taught in Queen Square, and, beneath that respectable work, a letter to a schoolmistress near Bristol who sometimes placed governesses without asking why they needed removal. The 2 dressmakers' girls, Bet and Clara, remained near the Atlas shelf, sharing a heel of bread and the last inch of Mrs. Valancourt's smuggled plum cake while they copied geography terms for no employer at all. In the back room, Mrs. Lyle had slept for nearly an hour in the old reading chair with the torn arm, a volume of sermons open upon her lap like a character reference she had never deserved needing. No improper late gathering, no radical female conspiracy. Only women using warmth, paper, and one another's nearness as if those things had not been rationed to them all their lives. The bell rang, every head lifted, not loudly, not dramatically, only at once. I hated that the sound had already altered us. Yesterday, a bell meant subscriber, delivery, late return servant, curiosity, rain shelter, gossip, sometimes opportunity. Now meant possible inspection, possible complaint, possible withdrawal, possible man. I went to the door myself. On the steps stood Mr. Tresham with a clerk and a young lady whose expression suggested she had not so much accompanied him as refused to be left behind. The sister then. She was fairer than he, with clearer color and a mouth more willing to betray thought. Her bonnet was tied in haste rather than in decorum, and her eyes moved past me once. Not in snobbery, but with the frank hunger of someone who had heard a place described as dangerous and wanted to discover whether it had chairs. Mrs. Fenwick, Mr. Tresham said. Mr. Tresham. The clerk shifted behind him, clutching a leather satchel to his middle as if afraid the building might demand evidence of his own innocence. Mr. Tresham glanced past me into the room. May we enter? On what terms? His eyes came back to mine. That question might have annoyed him yesterday. Tonight he received it as one receives a bill that is deserved, if inconvenient. A's agreed. Corridor records, prior complaints, room use dates, no subscriber names. I opened the door wider. The young lady stepped in first, which told me either that she had been raised without enough fear or that she had already decided the order of entry mattered. Mr. Tresham noticed and did not stop her. The clerk came after, then Mr. Tresham, bringing with him cold air and the restrained discomfort of a man returning to a room that had begun, without his permission, to make him less certain of himself. This is my sister, he said. Miss Rosamond Tresham. I had guessed. Miss Tresham looked delighted. Had you? Gabriel hates being guessed near. Dear, like that. But she turned to me. Mrs. Fenwick, I apologize for coming without invitation. My brother said it would make matters difficult. Naturally I came. I admire a consistent family method. She smiled at that, then saw the 3 returned subscription cards on my desk and stopped smiling. Young she might be. Foolish, no. Are those because of us? She asked. Because of complaint. I said that is a generous distinction. Not generous. Practical. Blame is wasted unless placed where it can be answered. Mr. Tresham removed his hat slowly. He had heard that too. The clerk cleared his throat. Shall I set up here, sir? Noba. Mr. Tresham looked toward the small side table near the east shelves. There. And you will record only what Mrs. Fenwick permits to be copied. If uncertain, ask. The clerk blinked, perhaps having expected female opposition, not male boundaries placed on his pen. Yes, sir. Miss Tresham moved farther into the room, no longer looking at the shelves as spectacle. Her gaze went first to Mrs. Valancourt, then to Miss Pike, then to Bet and Clara, and last to the closed door behind which Mrs. Lyle slept. She took in distinctions quickly. Good. Some young ladies look at other women and see only distance. Miss Tresham saw arrangement. Mrs. Valancourt lowered her knitting. You are the sister. I am afraid so. Do not be afraid. Younger sisters are often society's last available conscience, Mr. Tresham said. Mrs. Valancourt, you know me. I have seen your subscription in the accounts. Then you have had a dull evening. Several. That earned him from Mrs. Valancourt something close to approval. Dangerous progress. I took the folder of corridor notes from beneath the desk and placed it before him. These are copies of my letters to the trustees regarding the Trimble Lane stair and unauthorized evening traffic. He opened the folder. His face changed at once. Not because of the content, because of the dates. Yes, I said. There are 4. His gaze moved over the first page, then the second. This one is from last November, and when unanswered. To whom addressed? Mr. Pike as building secretary. Copy the committee office. A Miss Pike, at the back table, stopped writing. I did not look at her. Neither did Mr. Tresham, which I counted in his favor. The clerk had opened his satchel and taken out an inkstand, but now sat with pen suspended, uncertain whether to record the existence of letters that seemed likely to embarrass men who employed other men to write such things down. Mr. Tresham said, copy the dates and add that the original letters were produced by Mrs. Fenwick this evening. The clerk bent to his work. I gave him the incident ledger next, with the names removed and the categories preserved. Mr. Tresham read standing. He did that often, I had begun to notice, as if sitting meant accepting comfort before work had earned it. He turned one page. Late knock at Trimble Lane, unknown male waiting after Mrs. H. Departure. 2 gentlemen's servants observed near Service Bend without delivery. Music chamber hired under charitable name noise after midnight. Unlisted supper, room gathering. Women exiting by rear stair under escort not recorded. Mrs. L. requested safe wait due to household danger. Miss P. followed from Queen Square by boy in livery unknown to her household. At that last entry, Miss Pike dropped her pen. A small sound. Horrifyingly large in the quiet room. Miss Tresham turned. Miss Pike. The governess's face had gone white. I am quite well. No woman in the room believed her. Mr. Tresham least of all. He set down the ledger. Mrs. Fenwick, may I ask Miss Pike a question? Miss Pike looked ready to vanish into her own sleeves. You may ask, I said. She may refuse. A flicker passed across his face. Not annoyance, adjustment. He crossed the room but stopped well short of the table, keeping the entire length of a chair between himself and the governess. Miss Pike, he said. It was the livery identifiable. She folded her hands so tightly the knuckles stood up like little stones. Dark green. Silver braid. I do not know the crest. Miss Tresham drew a breath, but Mr. Tresham heard it. Rosamond. She looked at her brother, then at Miss Pike, and did not hide the fact that she had connected something. Underhill colors are dark green, she said. The room altered. Mrs. Underhill, the quiet companion who had taken the envelope from beneath Cowper, had left an hour ago. Mr. Underhill was a widower with a son whom Bath mothers considered promising if one ignored the gambling, which they did because income improves eyesight selectively. If his livery had been used near the Trimble Lane stair, then the complaint's orbit widened from vague morality to names with visiting cards. Miss Pike whispered. I cannot swear it. No, I said. And no one will ask you to. Mr. Tresham looked at me. You already suspected a connection. I suspected several. Underhill. I suspected proximity. Not proof. He returned to the desk. Slower now. The clerk's pen scratched. Miss Tresham remained beside Miss Pike instead of returning to her brother. That, too, mattered. Young women of her standing are taught all their lives that proximity to trouble may be contagious. She chose it anyway. Mrs. Valancourt said from the fire. Well, that grows less like book corruption and more like men. The clerk made a small choked sound and pretended it was ink trouble. Mr. Tresham did not rebuke her. I opened the day ledger to the 3 subscription withdrawals and turned it toward him. This began before your arrival, though your inspection has made it useful. These 3 came today. He read the cards. Lady Merwether, he said. Her nephew sits on the room committee. Of course he does. Mrs. Everleigh's son plays whist in the Crescent card rooms. He paused at the second card. Miss Camber's aunt is a friend of Mrs. Underhill. The pattern, once spoken aloud, became less ghost than map. He looked toward the closed back room. And Mrs. Lyle. Her husband drinks where he is extended credit. In the Crescent rooms. Not officially. His eyes held mine. And unofficially, asked the corridor. He looked back down at the ledger. The man had come yesterday to inspect whether women were making improper use of a library. Now the record before him showed a different use entirely: the library as witness, inconvenience, shelter, and obstruction to men who preferred the adjacent rooms unwatched. Miss Tresham came to the desk and picked up Lady Merwether's note without asking. Her reading manners were worse than his. I liked her better for it. If this spreads, she said, the story will become that ladies ceased attending because Mrs. Fenwick admitted unsuitable women, not because unsuitable men were seen too near them. I said, and if the library closes, those women lose the room, while the men keep theirs. Mr. Tresham looked at his sister. She met his gaze. That is what this is, Gabriel. No, she said very gently for a sister. You are becoming aware. The blow landed because it was affectionate enough to be accurate. He said nothing. Mrs. Lyle's door opened. She stood there wrapped in my shawl. The bruise at her mouth darkening despite powder, the hollow sermon book clasped to her chest. Behind her the little brass key was no longer in its muslin wrapping. She must have taken it out while we spoke. I should go, she said. No, I answered. She flinched. I softened my voice. Not yet. Her eyes moved to Mr. Tresham and then to Miss Tresham, who did something unexpected and very right. She turned away slightly, offering privacy without pretending absence. Mrs. Lyle came no farther into the room. My husband will be worse if I am not there when he returns. Mr. Tresham's jaw tightened. I asked, does the key open your sister's lodging? She nodded. In Walcott. But I cannot be seen going. Then Bet will take a parcel to Trimble Lane, I said. Clara will walk with Mrs. Valancourt's footman to the corner. Miss Pike will remain until her route is clear. You will leave as a seamstress's aunt with mending wrapped in brown paper. Not by the front. Mr. Tresham stared at me. Not in shock at deception. In shock at speed. This was what men who made policy almost never understood. Women's safety is often logistics performed before anyone has time to name it virtue. Mrs. Lyle whispered. I cannot ask that. You did not. I arranged it. Miss Tresham stepped forward. My maid can lend you an outer shawl. It is plain enough. Mr. Tresham turned to her. Rosamund. She lifted her chin. If my reputation is already imperiled by entering this library, I may as well earn the charge. For a moment they looked exactly like siblings, angry, fond, frightened, and unwilling to surrender the point first. Then he said, my carriage is at the corner. I said at once. He turned back to me. It is safer. It is visible. I can send it away and have the groom. His mouth tightened. You refuse any assistance I propose. I refuse assistance designed from a gentleman's line of sight. Mrs. Valancourt gave a grim little nod by the fire. Mr. Tresham's temper rose. I saw it. Then, to his credit, he mastered it before giving it words. Then tell me where my assistance is not injurious. The question was blunt, not graceful, useful therefore. I pointed to the corridor folder. You will send your clerk away with copies of the complaint dates. You will not allow the committee to handle this as a library discipline matter. You will find out who hired the music chamber under charitable names. You will speak to Mr. Pike without naming Miss Pike. You will discover whether under livery has been used near Trimble Lane. And tonight, when Mrs. Lyle leaves, you will not be noble. You will be absent. Something in his face changed. Being told not to act is often harder for men of conscience than being asked to act dangerously. The former leaves them alone with the fact that usefulness is not always visible. He bowed his head once. Very well. The clerk looked up in alarm. Sir. You heard Mrs. Fenwick. Finish the dates. The room settled into motion then, quiet but complete. Bet wrapped cloth around a parcel of nothing in particular. Clara folded brown paper. Miss Tresham removed her shawl and gave it to Mrs. Lyle without ceremony. Mrs. Valancourt sent her footman's name on a scrap. as if she had planned from birth to support minor conspiracies at twilight. Miss Pike resumed writing, though her hand shook at first and steadied by the second line. Mr. Tresham stood at my desk, watching not as trustee now, but as a man finally understanding that the library's order had existed long before he arrived to judge it. This happens often, he said quietly. Which part? All of it. And you do this with no formal protection. I have Elise, a belle Mrs. Valcourt's footman when she chooses to be tyrannical, and women who know how to leave rooms without being seen. That is not protection. No, I said. It is what women make when protection has been reserved for people who already possess it. He looked down at the ledger again. The 3 withdrawal cards remained beside his hand. The reprieve he had given yesterday felt smaller now, not meaningless. Smaller. If I close this room, he said so quietly only I heard, I remove the only place where some of this becomes visible. And if I leave it open without dealing with the adjoining rooms, I make you more exposed. His eyes met mine. There was not agreement, not allegiance, but the true beginning of consequence. He said, then closure was never the clean option. The corner of his mouth tightened, though with anger at himself rather than at me. I dislike discovering I have been useful to the wrong side by being orderly. That is how the wrong side prefers useful men. He accepted that. Not happily, but fully. At the door, Miss Tresham helped Mrs. Lyle settle the plain shawl over her bonnet. Under it, the bruise no longer caught the room's first attention. She looked smaller, safer, perhaps, though safety is a word I have learned to use sparingly. Before leaving, Mrs. Lyle turned to me. Thank you. Return the sermon book when convenient, I said. Her mouth moved as if she might cry or laugh and feared both would hurt. Then she went by the west passage, not the front door, with Bet carrying the brown paper parcel ahead and Clara waiting 2 minutes before following. Mr. Tresham did not watch the passage door close. He did as I had told him. He turned to Weem. That may have been the first moment I trusted him with anything at all. The library did not become safer after Mrs. Lyle left. It became more exact. That is the cruelty of a room after danger passes through it. Chairs remain where they were. Books keep their spines turned outward. Firelight continues its ordinary work over brass, thread, paper, and polished wood. Yet every person inside knows the room has been measured by a different standard now. Not by comfort, by consequence. Mr. Tresham stayed by the subscription desk while his clerk copied dates from my complaint letters into a formal memorandum. The young man wrote carefully, with the pained neatness of someone who had begun the evening as an instrument of procedure and found himself, instead, recording evidence that procedure had ignored. Miss Tresham sat beside Miss Pike at the back table and asked, in a low voice, whether the governess preferred translation work or copy work. She did not ask as a lady dispensing interest. She asked as one woman suddenly embarrassed to have had choices she had never counted as choices. Mrs. Valcourt knitted, badly. On purpose, I suspected, because it allowed her to remain without looking sentimental. Mr. Tresham turned a page of the corridor ledger and stopped at the blue mark beside one entry. You still will not tell me the symbols, he said. He looked up. Even now, especially now, the clerk's pen paused. Mr. Tresham noticed and said, Mr. Alton, continue copying the dates only. The pen resumed at once. Good. He had learned something. Not enough, but something. I closed the corridor ledger halfway. Symbols are not decoration. They are instructions to myself. For what? For what must not be forgotten when a woman's face says nothing. His gaze held mine, and I saw the sentence reach him more deeply than I had meant it to. One must be careful with honest explanations. They travel farther than argument. He touched the ledger edge but did not try to open it farther. On the blue marks, I almost smiled. You dislike being refused twice. 3 times. Then you are improving at counting disappointment. His mouth moved. This time he did not entirely suppress it. The almost smile changed his face in a way I wished not to notice. It did not make him younger. It made him less edited. I looked down at the ledger before that became visible to either of us. The blue marks mean the woman needs something that cannot be borrowed from a shelf, I said. He became still. Work, safe passage, letters, money, money, rarely. Money leaves too much power in the hand that gives it. Work is better when possible, and when not possible. Then one does what one must and tries not to let gratitude become another kind of debt. He absorbed that in silence. The front room had thinned now. Bet and Clara had gone by separate routes after Mrs. Lyle. Miss Bell had left with a volume she did not want and the expression of a woman who would return tomorrow, because not returning would feel too much like defeat. Mrs. Valcourt remained because Mrs. Valcourt did exactly as she pleased. Miss Pike still copied, though I suspected she had reached the end of the useful part of her work and continued only because Miss Tresham had made leaving unnecessary. Mr. Alton finished his memorandum and sanded it. Seer. Mr. Tresham reviewed the copy, signed the lower corner, and handed it back. Take this to my rooms. Do not leave it with Mr. Pike, Mr. Hale, or any clerk of the Crescent Committee. It goes into my locks. The clerk bowed. Yes, sir. On Mr. Alton, sir. No conversation about tonight. Not in office, in lodging, not over supper. Not because someone asks lightly and you think light answers harmless. The young man flushed. Of course, sir. There is no of course where gossip is concerned. There is only discipline. That I approved. Mr. Alton left through the front door, clutching the memorandum as if it had become considerably heavier on the walk from desk to threshold. Miss Tresham rose soon after. Jabriel, I will sit with Mrs. Valakurt for 10 minutes if Mrs. Fenwick permits. I want to ask about her footman. You want to avoid being sent home. That too. Mrs. Valakurt did not look up. I permit young ladies to ask questions only if they are prepared to dislike the answers. Miss Tresham's chin lifted. Then I shall ask too. She crossed to the hearth. That left Mr. Tresham and me at the desk, not alone, but separated from the rest by enough distance that the room altered around us. He took the post-road book from where it still lay beside the complaint. May we discuss this? We can discuss its return date. Not the book. Then no. He opened the rear board and drew out the blue recommendation slip he had written on before. Not the draft he had seen and I had pocketed. The old one. The one that had traveled between Larkspur and me before Mr. Tresham arrived with authority in his coat. You called maps romances that admit distance honestly, I said. I did. That was better before I knew you were a trustee. I thought it better before I knew you were in danger of losing the room. The answer landed too close. I took a returned volume from the stack and pretended to check its binding. Subscribers often like their own melancholy. Is that what you thought it was? I thought it was controlled. There is a difference. He turned the slip once between his fingers. And your answer? I answered a borrower. You answered me. No, I said. I answered a mind that had not yet brought a complaint to my desk. He accepted that, though not happily. I used the name Larkspur because my mother planted them badly, he said. I looked up despite myself. He kept his eyes on the slip. They fell every year. She refused to stake them because she said plants, like children, ought to learn balance without sticks. The garden looked ridiculous bijally. That is a poor horticultural principle, a decent maternal one. His gaze rose to mine there. I had gone too far into him, too quickly. Then he surprised me by answering always, but memorable. The room seemed quieter suddenly, though no one had stopped moving. I set the returned volume down. You asked for books on roads because you missed leaving. I asked for roads because I rarely leave without purpose. He folded the slip along its existing crease. Maps show the comfort of possible departure without requiring one to be irresponsible enough to take it. That is the saddest defense of cartography I have ever heard. Again the almost smile. How many have you heard? Fewer than I would like. More than society recommends. He looked at the shelves behind me. You liked answering me. I should have denied it. Instead I said, Wes. The honesty startled us both. His hand stilled over the slip. I liked having one exchange in which no one asked whether the room was respectable, I said, because a half-truth would now be worse than none. Only whether a book had answered what the reader actually needed. His voice lowered. You chose well. Not always. For me. I reached for a stack of returned novels and aligned them unnecessarily. You borrowed as if you wished to be contradicted. I did. Most men only pretend to want that. I am not sure I wanted it pleasantly. Contradiction is rarely at its best when made pleasant. Now he looked down then, and for one moment I saw not the trustee, but the man who had sat somewhere in Bath with a blue slip in a dry book, asking questions too intimate for speech and safe only because neither of us had possessed a face. That safety was gone now. In its place stood something warmer, less useful, and far more likely to injure. He reached into his coat and removed another folded slip. My breath caught before I could stop it. You kept them. Some. How many is some? Enough to condemn my judgment if discovered. That is not a number. But he placed the slip on the desk between us but did not open it. I knew it at once, not the exact words, but the paper. My own blue slips were cut from the same bundle of cheap foolscap, slightly uneven where I trimmed too quickly near closing. He unfolded it. My earlier hand crossed the paper. Larkspur, you ask whether a person may prefer imaginary roads because real ones require leave. I think many do, but a road imagined too often becomes a room one has built inside oneself. Mind that you do not furnish your prison too comfortably. Beneath it, his reply. Unsent because the book had never returned with this slip, madam. I resent the accuracy. I stared at the words. Then against wisdom I laughed, not loudly, not safely, but enough that Mrs. Valakurt glanced up with predatory satisfaction and Miss Tresham looked delighted before pretending not to have noticed. Mr. Tresham's expression changed as if the sound had done something to me he had no procedure for managing. You never sent that, I said. Why? Because I thought it revealed too much. It reveals that you dislike being known. That is hardly privileged information. No, I said, only confirmed by evidence. He refolded the slip with unnecessary care. And you? What did you keep? I should have said nothing. Instead, perhaps because the room had been too full of fear for too many hours, I reached beneath the desk and unlocked the narrow drawer where I kept repairs, sealing wax, unpaid notices, and foolishness. I drew out a single slip. His hand. His question. Do you ever choose a book for someone because you hope it will trouble them? My answer beneath, never sent yes, but only when I believe the trouble may leave them more honest than it found them. He read it. A flush rose beneath his skin, not embarrassment exactly, but something made of being seen and refusing to step back from it. And which books did you choose for that purpose? He asked. For you. All of them after the second week. The words were too intimate the moment they existed. He heard it. So did it. So, unfortunately, did Mrs. Valcourt, who said from the fire, Mrs. Fenwick, if you are conducting a literary confession, I hope there will be biscuits. Miss Tresham laughed outright. The tension broke, but not entirely. It changed shape. Mr. Tresham put both slips into his coat. One is, one mine. I ought to have objected. I did not. Instead, I said, borrowing without entry is theft. I will return them. When they cease to be necessary. The answer should have annoyed me. It did. It also warmed me. Annoyingly. Before I could respond, Miss Tresham rose from the hearth with her good humor gone. Gabriel. He turned. She held a card in her hand, not one of mine, cream paper, fine border. Deliver, I suspected, while we were occupied in the passage of thought neither of us should have entered so carelessly. What is it? He asked. A note from Lady Sefton's maid. Left with Mrs. Valcourt's footman. Mrs. Valcourt said, because my footman is more useful than most gentlemen and cheaper to maintain. Miss Tresham did not smile. She gave the card to her brother. He read it, his face closed. Mine followed before I knew why. What has happened? I asked. Miss Tresham answered, not him. Lady Sefton regrets that tomorrow's drive must be postponed. Her son has been advised that the Crescent rooms are under scrutiny and that my presence here tonight may be misconstrued. There it was. The cost had arrived not as thunder, but as stationery. Mr. Tresham looked at his sister. Roshi lifted a hand. Do not comfort me badly. I will be cross. His mouth shut. Brave girl. She took the card back and read it again with a face too steady to be natural. So, she said, Mrs. Fenwick may lose subscribers because women enter her room. I may lose callers because I entered it once, and the men in the adjoining supper room will dine tomorrow unless someone stops them. The library held still. Mr. Tresham folded his hand around the back of a chair. No one spoke. Then Miss Tresham looked directly at me. Mrs. Fenwick, she said, if this room is now attached to my reputation, I should prefer to deserve it. Mr. Tresham closed his eyes for one brief instant, as if asking Heaven why younger sisters had been made with courage and no sense of timing. I said, that depends what you mean by deserve. I mean, she said, that if women are to be punished for being seen here, then perhaps we should make certain the right people are seen elsewhere. At that, Mr. Tresham opened his eyes, and I knew the evening had crossed a line no one in the room could pretend not to see. Miss Tresham's sentence remained in the room long after she finished speaking. Not because it was dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was practical. Mr. Tresham looked at his sister as if she had opened a door he had spent his life keeping properly shut, and now found that what stood behind it had been listening for years. Rosamund, he said, you will not become involved in this. She smiled at him. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the sort of smile young ladies learn from older women when they have heard a command disguised as concern one time too many. I already am, not beyond what can be corrected. Corrected, she repeated. How tidy. Shall I send Lady Sefton a note explaining that my presence in a library was a clerical error? Mrs. Valcourt gave a tiny sound of approval from the hearth. Mr. Tresham ignored her with visible effort. That is not what I meant. No, Miss Tresham said. You meant that if I return home quickly, say nothing, appear nowhere near Mrs. Fenwick, and allow you to arrange matters with gentlemen in private rooms, perhaps society will agree to forget I had the bad taste to stand near useful women. But the room became very still. Miss Pike had lowered her pen. Mrs. Valcourt stopped knitting. Even the fire seemed to settle more quietly. I should have intervened. I did not. A woman cannot run a refuge and then silence the first respectable girl who discovers how little refuge respectability gives her when men decide the weather has changed. Mr. Tresham's face had gone hard, but not from anger alone. I am trying to protect you. Yes, she said. That is what makes it so difficult to object. The words hit him. More importantly, she saw it. Her voice softened, though her posture did not. Gabriel, I know you mean well. I know you have spent years making decisions so other people may avoid being hurt by them. But I am not a parcel to be kept dry until the road improves. His hand tightened on the chair back. He said quietly, you are my sister, and Mrs. Fenwick is this room's owner. But Miss Pike is not a footnote. Mrs. Lyle is not an unfortunate complication. Mrs. Valcourt is not an elderly inconvenience with excellent timing. Thus she glanced at the fire. Though she may be that also. I am certainly that, Mrs. Valcourt said. Miss Tresham looked back at him. If the price of my appearing acceptable is that all this remains invisible, then the price is too high. There are certain silences in which a person's character becomes visible. Not the ornamental kind shown at balls, charities, and dinner tables. The harder kind. The kind formed when convenience has offered a safe road and someone has begun, with trembling hands, to step away from it. Mr. Tresham looked at his sister for several seconds. Then he released the chair. What do you propose? The question changed the room. Miss Tresham heard it too. She drew breath, surprised despite herself. You are asking me. Properly. His mouth tightened. Do not become intolerable because you are pleased. Too late, murmured Mrs. Valcourt. Miss Tresham ignored that, though her eyes brightened. I propose we stop behaving as though Mrs. Fenwick must defend herself against vague accusations while men in the adjoining rooms remain unnamed. Mr. Tresham said, names without proof become slander, then gather proof. I intend to. Cue the moment. For whose comfort? His jaw worked once. I stepped in then before brother and sister cut each other in places the evening still needed whole. Quiet proof is not always cowardice, I said. But quiet proof must have a deadline or it becomes another postponement women are asked to survive. Mr. Tresham turned to me, then set one. I had not expected that. Neither apparently had Miss Tresham. She looked delighted. I disliked both reactions equally. The committee meets in 3 days, I said. The complaint against the library will be discussed then. Then before that meeting, we need enough documented connection to force the question away from my shelves and toward the adjoining rooms. Document repeated. He whispered, yes. Not bruises displayed from male pity. Not Miss Pike forced to identify livery in a room full of men who will call uncertainty character weakness. Records. Mrs. Valacourt said. Receipts are often more truthful than men. They are at least more careless, I said. Mr. Tresham's gaze sharpened. Room bookings, payments for the music chamber and supper room, delivery records. I added. Wine, food, candles, coal. Men hiding vice still expect supper to arrive warm. Miss Tresham came closer to the desk. And servants see who carries what. They see, I said. They do not always survive saying so. Her face sobered. Good. Courage is useful only after it has met cost. Mr. Tresham looked toward the west passage door. Mr. Pike keeps the booking lists and ignores letters about the passage. Then he is either negligent, frightened, paid, or involved. That is a wide net. It is not my fault men are repetitive. Mrs. Valacourt coughed into her wool again. This time Mr. Tresham almost smiled openly. Almost. Then he became official but not as he had been before. Less close-morected. I can request the room ledgers under trustee authority, he said. Openly, if necessary. No again, I said. You are growing accustomed to it. Not fond. Ask openly and Pike will clean them before you receive them. He may not dare. That is optimism wearing a hat. Miss Tresham laughed once, then covered it badly. Mr. Tresham looked at me as if deciding whether irritation or agreement deserved precedence. Agreement won, narrowly. Then how? You asked for something too small to frighten him, such as repair costs, candle tallies, cleaning charges. The dull accounts men believe beneath fraud because no one ever seduces a woman by discussing lamp oil. Do they not? Mrs. Valacourt asked. Everyone looked at her. She lifted one shoulder. I had a lively youth. Miss Tresham made a strangled sound. Mr. Tresham shut his eyes briefly. I turned a page in my ledger because someone in the room had to remain useful. The point, I said, is that if the same charitable names hire the music chamber and supper room, and the same deliveries increase on those nights, and passage incidents rise afterward, then the complaint against the library becomes harder to treat as isolated female disorder. But Mr. Tresham nodded slowly. Pattern and witnesses. Later. Once paper has made room for them. Miss Tresham's gaze moved toward Miss Pike. And if the paper points to Underhill. Miss Pike went very still. Mr. Tresham noticed and answered with care. Then we proceed carefully. No, I said. He looked at me. We proceed exactly. Carefully too often means slowly enough for the powerful to improve their position. The words landed harder than I intended, perhaps because they were aimed not only at him. He accepted them. Again, not happily. But he did. Exactly. Then, he said. There are turns in a conversation one feels in the body before the mind permits trust. That was one. Not because he had agreed with me. Agreement is cheap when untested. Because he had corrected his language without performing injury over the correction. Miss Tresham reached for one of the subscription cards still lying on the desk. This is the part I can help with, she said. Mr. Tresham's expression changed at once. No, you have not heard what I mean. I have heard the beginning, and disliked it because it involved me. She gave him a look. At least you are honest. I took the card gently from her hand. What do you mean? Lady Sefton did not write only because I entered this room. She wrote because someone told her quickly enough to make my visit useful before supper. Miss Tresham's eyes moved from her brother to me. That means news traveled from this building almost at once. Mr. Tresham said, servants, or someone watching the entrance. Or both, I said. Miss Tresham nodded. If I appear tomorrow morning in a place society cannot resist watching, I may discover which concern arrives first. No, Mr. Tresham said. She ignored him. A call at the pump room not long. Nothing dramatic. I will mention, with the proper degree of irritation, that Gabriel is being unbearably stern about building accounts and has requested every minor expense record from the Crescent rooms. I saw it at once. Mr. Tresham did too, which did not improve his mood. You want to flush whoever fears the minor accounts. I want to be more useful than a threatened marriage prospect, she said. His face altered. Softly, because anger would have been easier to bear, he said, you were never only that. No, she replied. But today I was treated as one. I should like compensation. Mrs. Valacourt murmured. Excellent girl. Miss Pike had not moved. I lost Pike. Her eyes lifted. If Underhill colors appear again near Trimble Lane, do not follow. Do not identify. Do not be brave in a way that leaves you alone. Her mouth tightened. I am not brave. That is why I trust your judgment. That surprised her more than praise would have done. Mr. Tresham watched the exchange with an expression I could not name. It made me uncomfortable, so I returned to the ledger. We need 3 lines of inquiry, I said. Building accounts, use patterns, message movement. He came to stand beside the desk, but not too close. That too he had learned. Building accounts through me, he said. Room, use patterns through Pike's minor ledgers and your corridor notes. Message movement through Rosamond's morning call. And Mrs. Valancourt's footman, Miss Tresham added. Mrs. Valancourt did not look up. Harold has long ears and no moral vanity, a rare combination. Would he listen near the committee office? I asked. He listens wherever I tell him to stand while pretending his knee pains him. Mr. Tresham looked at her. Madam, are you admitting you use your footman for surveillance? I am old. It is called concern. I laughed before I could stop myself. Mr. Tresham looked at me. The sound faded at once, not because of shame, but because his attention made it newly private. He had heard me laugh twice now. I had heard too much in his silence. This was becoming a ledger of another kind, and I had no sensible category in which to place the entries. He looked away first. Good man, or dangerous one. The distinction remained unresolved. The west passage door opened softly, and Bet slipped back into the room alone. I rose at once. Mrs. Lyle, safe to her sister's lodging, Mom. Bet's cheeks were flushed from the walk and cold. No one followed that I saw. Clara stayed at the corner until Mrs. Valancourt's man nodded. Mrs. Valancourt said, Harold nods with great economy. It is one of his gifts. But, good, I said. What hesitated? There was a man by Trimble Lane when I came back, not waiting, smoking near the wall. Mr. Tresham straightened. Livery. No, sir, plain coat, but he had green ribbon tied around his hat brim. I thought it odd. Miss Pike went paler than before. Again. Mr. Tresham asked, Did he speak? No, sir. Only looked toward the passage door, then toward the supper room side. Would you know him again? Bet looked frightened by the question. I said, You do not need to answer that now. Mr. Tresham said, No, she does. I turned on him. He realized it an instant too late, but to his credit corrected himself before I spoke. I beg your pardon, he said to Bet, not to me. Mrs. Fenwick is right. You need not and stared at him, startled by apology from a gentleman. I think so, sir, but I am not sure. But, then that is the answer, I said. Think so, not sure. Mr. Tresham gave one sharp nod. I wrote it exactly that way. Plain-coated man near Trimble Lane after Mrs. L. departure. Green ribbon at hat. Seen by B. Thinks may know again. Uncertain. Pattern not proof yet. Miss Tresham looked from the note to her brother. Green again. And Underhill uses green, Miss Pike whispered. Mr. Underhill's son sometimes in the Crescent rooms. Everyone heard it. She flushed violently and looked down. I did not ask how she knew. A governess in Bath learns household movements the way a sailor learns wind, because survival depends upon noticing what richer people pretend not to reveal. Mr. Tresham said very carefully, Thank you, Miss Pike. Nothing more. No pressure. She nodded once. The clock struck 9. The sound startled me. Not because it was late, but because the hour had once marked the edge between permitted and improper. Tonight, impropriety had become the only honest part of the day. Mr. Tresham gathered the complaint, the copied dates, and a list of minor accounts he meant to request by morning. Miss Tresham retied her bonnet. Mrs. Valancourt announced that she would leave only after Mr. Tresham had gone, because otherwise the room would be deprived of mature supervision at a critical moment. No one had strength enough to dispute her. At the door, Mr. Tresham turned back. I will send word after I speak to Pike. To me. Under what name? He paused. Larkspur lay between us like a book neither of us dared return fully to the shelf. Then he said, My own. A small thing. Not small. Very well, Mr. Tresham. His eyes held mine. Good night, Mrs. Fenwick. Miss Tresham, already halfway out, said, Jabriel, if you make that sound more solemn, people will think you are proposing to the lending desk. She smiled at me. Good night, Mrs. Fenwick. Tomorrow I shall be useful in public. That is a dangerous ambition. So I am learning. They left. This time the bell did not settle the room into fear. Not entirely. I stood behind my desk and looked down at the blue slips Mr. Tresham had not returned, the withdrawal cards, the corridor notes, and the new line about the man with green ribbon. The campaign against the library had acquired a color. By morning, it might have a name. The green ribbon arrived before breakfast, not on a hat, not near Trimble Lane, not attached to any man careless enough to be useful. It came folded inside a note slipped beneath the library door before I opened for the day, a narrow strip of dark green silk pressed flat against cheap paper. No signature. Only 6 words, written in a hand made deliberately clumsy close earlier, and no one bleeds. I stood in the doorway with the key still in my hand and felt the morning narrow around me. Bath had not yet fully awakened. The street outside shone damp and pale. A milk cart rattled at the corner. Somewhere a woman called up to a window about rolls gone cold. Perfectly ordinary sounds. Which is one of the indecencies of threat. The world does not have the manners to darken when it ought. I picked up the ribbon with a paper wrapper, not my bare fingers. By 8:30, Mrs. Valancourt had arrived without her knitting, which was how I knew she expected trouble. By 9, Miss Pike appeared with her face too composed and her gloves buttoned crookedly. By 10 minutes past 9, Mr. Tresham entered through the front door carrying a sealed packet, his sister behind him, and a look on his face that told me his meeting with Mr. Pike had not produced innocence. I placed the green ribbon on the desk. Mr. Tresham saw it at once. His expression did not change enough for the room to notice. I noticed. "Where?" he asked. "Under the door." 1. Before opening, a Miss Tresham came closer. "May I?" "Nope." Her brother and I said together. That would have amused me on a better morning. She looked between us. How united. How alarming. Mr. Tresham ignored that and drew the note nearer with the end of his pencil. He read it once. Then he looked at me. "You did not touch it. With paper only." "Good. Do not sound approving. It makes me itch." His mouth tightened, almost in the wrong direction for the circumstances. Then he became severe again. I spoke to Pike, and he produced minor expense ledgers with impressive reluctance. Clean. Too clean. I exhaled. A dirty ledger is useful. A clean ledger is a man smiling with both hands behind his back. Mr. Tresham placed his sealed packet on my desk and opened it. Inside lay copied entries, all in a clerk's hand with his own notes in the margin candles. Coal, wine, supper charges, servant gratuities, room cleaning, breakage fees. At first glance, nothing named the thing itself. At second glance, the pattern had teeth. Music chamber hired under charitable initials on 3 evenings after my late letters went unanswered. Supper room charged separately on the same nights. Extra candles, extra wine. Cleaning fees paid in cash. 1 note for broken glass charged not to the room account, but to private settlement. Twice a gratuity to the rear door porter. 4 times. Repairs to the Trimble Lane lock. I tapped the lock entries. 4 repairs. 4 a door nobody respectable uses. Apparently respectability is hard on hinges. Miss Tresham leaned over the sheet despite her brother's frown. And here, a green ribbon. My heart moved. Not a receipt entry. Annotation in the margin, one of the supper room charges. GR, men admitted by side. GR, I said. Could be green ribbon. Miss Tresham said. It could, Mr. Tresham replied. Or initials. Whose? He unfolded a second page. Underhill appeared twice. Not fully. Not in a clear account line. But in cross-refs initials connected to a wine delivery UH party. Private settlement through P. Pike. Miss Pike had gone very pale by the French shelf. I saw Mr. Tresham prepare to ask something. I said, no. He stopped. We had come far enough that he understood the word before resenting it. Miss Pike is not to be pressed in front of a room, I said. His gaze held mine. Agreed. That single word settled something in me against my will. Mrs. Valacourt lowered herself into her usual chair. Underhill is a coward's name. Miss Tresham turned. You know him. I know his mother. Which is worse. The son dangerous. A Mrs. Valacourt threaded no needle because she had brought none. Her empty hands rested over the head of her cane. Men like that rarely begin dangerous. They begin indulged. By the time danger appears, everyone calls it a misfortune no one could have foreseen. Miss Pike made a tiny sound. Not quite a sob. Not yet. I crossed to her before anyone else moved. Come with me, I said. She did not argue. I led her to the narrow repair room behind the desk where torn bindings, paste pots, thread, spare paper, and my second best kettle lived in uneasy fellowship. The room was barely large enough for 2 women and the truth, which made it more honest than many drawing rooms. Miss Pike stood by the shelf of damaged spines and twisted one glove finger until the seam gave. I should not have said anything. You said very little. That is enough. Sometimes, I said. It is. She swallowed. Mr. Underhill's son came twice to the Hadley house, not to call. He waited with another gentleman while Mr. Hadley changed for the card rooms. They laughed about the library, about how women here came and went like mice near a grain sack. My hands closed at my sides. And the livery. The boy following me was not from their household, but he had their ribbon. I think they use it to be known at the side door. Known by whom? I do not know. Her voice shook. But I saw Mr. Pike once in Trimble Lane. He was speaking to a man with the ribbon. I thought nothing of it. I thought she stopped. You thought what a tired woman thinks when the truth would cost too much before supper. Tears came then, though she did her best to keep them silent. I gave her my handkerchief. She looked at it as if kindness were another debt she could not afford. You need not speak before anyone, I said. But if you do not, we use paper first. If paper fails, then we decide what comes next. Together. Her eyes lifted. Together. The word sounded larger in the cramped repair room than it had any right to sound. When we returned, Mr. Tresham had not moved from the desk. That was well done too. Some men announced their restraint by pacing. He had simply remained where he could be seen not intruding. Miss Pike went to sit beside Mrs. Valacourt, who said nothing at all and merely placed one old hand on the chair arm between them. Close enough to be available, not enough to be spectacle. I returned to the desk. Mr. Pike spoke with a ribbon man in Trimble Lane, I said. Miss Pike saw at once. She does not know his name. She is not to be named in any memorandum. Mr. Tresham wrote nothing. Good, I said. I can remember a sentence without putting under seal. Men have remembered worse things less usefully. Miss Tresham gave me a quick look that said she would have laughed if the morning had permitted it. Mr. Tresham gathered the account pages. There is enough here to suspend Pike from handling building records. Enough for you, perhaps. Enough for the committee. Then what? His eyes went to the West Passage door. The side door porter will lie. Possibly. Will be instructed to lie. Likely. Will be dismissed if he tells the truth. Mr. Tresham looked back at me. Then I will need to make truth less expensive. I did not answer at once. Because that was the sentence, was it not? The one every safe person offers too late, and every unsafe person measures with suspicion. How? I ask. I can place him under my temporary employment before questioning him, if he fears Pike, Underhill, or the supper room men. He may answer more freely once his wages do not depend on them. Mrs. Valancourt said, useful. From her, this was a coronation. Miss Tresham stood straighter. And I... No, Mr. Trem said. She did not even blink. You have not heard the plan. I survived the pattern. I will call on Lady Sefton anyway. No, Gabriel. If I disappear after last night, then I confirm that the library is shameful. If I appear, calm and bored, everyone will ask why. When they ask, I will say only that you are making a tedious fuss about building accounts. That may stir precisely the people we want quiet. Wes, she said. Toward the accounts. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, with clear personal misery, take out Mercer. Miss Tresham's eyes widened. Truly, she is terrifying and almost respectable. She will enjoy this too much, I know. The young lady smiled, not prettily, strategically. I began to understand why Mr. Tresham often looked tired. Then the West Passage bell rang. Not the front bell. The small one near the internal door. Every woman in the room froze. Mr. Tresham turned first, but he did not move toward it. He looked at me, my room, my door, my decision. I hated how much that mattered. I went to the west door, opened it only to the chain, and found Bet on the other side, breathless, eyes wide. Mom, she whispered, there's a man in the passage, not near here. By the supper room turn. He's asking whether the library is open late tonight. Ribbon. She nodded. Green. Behind me, Mr. Tresham's voice came low. Let him ask. I turned. He may give us what we need. He may give us another threat. And if he leaves, then he leaves. His face tightened. Mrs. Fenwick, we cannot keep waiting for evidence to become polite. And we cannot bait a trap with girls who came here to read. Bet heard that. Her mouth trembled once. Mr. Tresham saw it, and shame entered his expression so quickly that I almost pitied him. Almost he stepped back. You are right. Those 3 words did more work in room than an argument. I looked back through the chained gap. Bet, tell him the public hours are posted at the front door. Nothing more. Then go through Mrs. Valancourt's side arrangement. Mrs. Valancourt called. Harold is at the corner. Of course he was. Bet nodded and vanished. I shut the door and locked it fully. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mr. Tresham said, I need to know who he is. But not like that. He drew a breath. Then I will go around from the front. To catch him. That too was better. I turned. Explain. If the man expects the library to stand alone, he learns otherwise. If he runs, I may see where. If he speaks, I may hear enough. If he reports back, he reports that the trustee he expected to frighten has become inconvenient. Mrs. Valancourt tapped her cane once on the floor. Better. Miss Tresham said, do not get stabbed. Sound advice. I will try to honor it. He took his hat at the door. He paused and looked back at me. Lock both entrances after me. I had intended to. Wes, he said. And it was nothing. It was too much. It was him recognizing competence instead of instructing obedience, and I disliked how deeply I felt the distinction. He left by the front. I locked the door behind him. The room waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 7. Then 10. Miss Tresham stood by the window, pretending to examine the street while watching the reflection in the glass. Mrs. Valancourt sat like a general without troops. Miss Pike held the handkerchief in both hands. I remained behind the desk because my knees had again become unreliable, which was unreasonable and therefore unwelcome. At last the front bell rang. I opened the door to Mr. Tresham, damp from the street and carrying in his hand a scrap of green ribbon torn from something by force or speed. He ran, he said, toward the mews behind the crescent. Did you see his face? And his gaze moved briefly to Miss Pike, then back to me. Not Underhill's son. Miss Pike's breath left her in a sound too close to relief. Mr. Tresham set the torn ribbon on my desk beside the first. But, he continued, he ran to Pike's office door before seeing me follow. There it was. Not proof complete enough for court. Enough for direction. Enough to name the building's own management as a hinge in the campaign. Miss Tresham came to the desk. Then the complaint is not merely being used by the supper room men, no, I said. It is being managed from inside the rooms. Mr. Tresham looked at the 2 green ribbons, the minor accounts, the withdrawal cards, the corridor ledger, and the locked west door. The word did not sound like victory. It sounded like responsibility. I took up my pencil and opened a fresh page. Then we write the shape of it. Mr. Tresham removed his gloves. This time, he sat, not across from me as inspector, beside the corner of the desk, angled toward the papers, near enough to work and far enough to show he knew nearness now had cost. Tell me where to begin, he said. I looked at him. The man who had come to close my room now waited for instruction inside it while his sister watched. A governess trembled. An old woman judged us all, and 2 strips of green ribbon lay between books and ledgers like small flags from a country no decent map admitted. "Beg in," I said. With the first unanswered letter. He dipped the pen, and the library, for the first time since the complaint arrived, stopped defending itself and began building its case. Chapter 3. The call turned away. The green ribbon had dried to a darker shade by morning. It lay pressed beneath the glass paperweight on my desk, 2 torn strips now, one threatening and one earned by Mr. Tresham's pursuit through the wet mews. Beside them sat the copies of my unanswered letters, the minor accounts from the Crescent rooms, 3 withdrawn subscription cards, and a fresh memorandum in his hand so exact it made every previous vagueness look not careless but designed. I had not slept well. That was not unusual. Widows with rents to pay, women to hide, and landlords discovering their consciences rarely enjoy luxurious rest. Still, the particular shape of my waking had been unpleasant. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Tresham seated at the corner of my desk, asking where to begin. Each time I opened them, I reminded myself that a man may begin well and still return to command the moment fear offers him a respectable chair. The library opened at 9. By past, no one had entered. That was the first sign. By 10:15, 2 circulating volumes had been returned by maidservants who would not meet my eye. Both came wrapped in brown paper. Neither maid carried a note, and both left too quickly to be asked whether their mistresses meant to renew. That was the second sign. At 10:05, Mrs. Valacourt arrived in person, which would ordinarily have steadied the room. Instead, she stood just inside the door, looked at the empty chairs, the untouched fire, the waiting shelves, and said, "Ah. Only it is remarkable how much ruin an elderly woman may put into one syllable." "Thee will come," I said. "Some will. You are a fountain of comfort." I have always considered comfort morally suspicious when offered before breakfast. She moved to her usual chair, though she did not take out her knitting. Her empty hands again. The sight of them troubled me more than the empty chairs. At 10:30, Miss Pike arrived by the front door rather than the west passage. Her bonnet brim sat lower than usual, and she held a book too tightly against her ribs. She saw the empty room, stopped, and then walked to the alcove as if walking required all her attention. "Miss Pike," I said. She turned. "Has something happened?" "No, ma, a lie, but a small one, not yet ripe enough to pick in company." Before I could ask another question, the bell rang again. Miss Tresham entered with an older lady who did not so much walk as advance. Aunt Mercer, I presumed. She was a tall, severe woman with a long chin, a bonnet that had not been chosen to please anyone born after the previous century, and eyes that suggested she had survived marriage, childbirth, widowhood, family dinners, and several bishops without mistaking any of them for moral authority. Mr. Tresham followed behind them. No worse. He looked decided. I disliked that before he spoke. "Mrs. Fenwick," he said. "Mr. Tresham." Miss Tresham removed her gloves with unnecessary energy. "The pump room was educational," Aunt Mercer said. "The pump room was full of cowards taking the waters in public and poison in private." Mrs. Valacourt lifted her head. "Mercer, Valacourt." They nodded to each other like rival monarchs acknowledging a treaty neither had signed. Miss Tresham came to the desk and placed a folded paper upon it. 3 people mentioned building accounts within 15 minutes. Mr. Tresham said, "Rosamond." "What?" "That is why we went. You need not announce it to the street. This is not the street. This is Mrs. Fenwick's desk, which appears to have become more useful than half the committee." Aunt Mercer looked at the empty chairs, and less attended. The words were not cruel. That made them harder. I took the folded paper. Miss Tresham had made notes, not neatly but quickly and well. Names, directions of glance, who spoke first, who repeated what, which ladies grew silent when Mr. Pike's name was mentioned, which gentleman left the room after hearing Mr. Tresham had requested expense records. "You did this in the pump room?" I asked. Miss Tresham looked pleased. "Under Aunt Mercer's supervision." "I cud when she wrote too visibly," Aunt Mercer said. "Aunt Mercer has a very tactical cough." "Whoso has society," Mrs. Valacourt said. "Only society calls it concern." But Mr. Tresham did not join the exchange. He stood near the desk, not too close, and looked at the empty room as though each vacant chair had entered a claim against him. I folded Miss Tresham's notes. "This is useful," she said, then flushed because the answer had come too quickly. "I am glad. It is useful," Mr. Tresham said, "and also finished." Miss Tresham turned. "Finished. For you." The room cooled. Aunt Mercer's eyes sharpened with interest. Mrs. Valacourt's fingers rested on the head of her cane. Miss Pike lowered her gaze to the same page she had not yet begun reading. I set Miss Tresham's notes beside the ribbon. "What does finished mean?" "It means Rosamond will not make further public inquiries. It means Miss Pike does not remain here past ordinary hours until the committee matter is contained. It means the West Passage stays locked except by prior arrangement. It means late admission stops for 3 nights. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of women measuring exactly how many doors he had just closed in the name of keeping one open. I looked at him steadily. "No," but his jaw tightened. "Mrs. Fenwick," Miss Tresham said, very softly, "Gabrieled." He did not look at her. That was his first mistake. I came around the desk. That was perhaps mine. You cannot sit in this room one evening, discover that women have built routes where official protection failed, and then begin your repair by locking the routes. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. I am not locking them. I am reducing exposure until I know who is using the building against you. Against us, Miss Tresham said. That time he did look at her. Yes, against us. Which is why I will not have you turning yourself into bait in public rooms. I did not bait anyone. You mentioned accounts to 3 women and watched which men twitched. Aunt Mercer said. 4 men twitched. I counted. He turned toward her. Madam, with respect, be careful with that phrase, Aunt Mercer said. Men put it before impertinence and hope one bows to the rapping. Mrs. Valacourt looked pleased enough to expire from it. Mr. Tresham held himself still for one visible second, then faced me again. The complaint will be heard in 2 days, he said. The pake nose pressure is coming. Underhill may know. The man with the green ribbon knows I followed him. A written threat was pushed under your door. This is not the moment to continue exactly as before for the sake of principle. For the sake of function, I said. The room works because women know the door remains available when need arrives, not when a trustee's calendar approves. And if need arrives with a knife behind it, then the answer is not to keep the woman outside. His eyes darkened. If someone is hurt because I allowed this to continue, a load. The word cut through the room. He heard it as soon as it left him. Good. But hearing a wrong word does not unmake the wound it opens. I took one step closer. You do not allow this library to be useful, Mr. Tresham. You may threaten the lease. You may influence the trustees. You may write memoranda, request accounts, and discover that your orderliness has been borrowed by men worse than yourself. But do not stand in my room and speak as if female survival requires your permission to continue. Ah! His face had gone pale beneath the discipline of it. Miss Tresham's eyes shone with something between fear and admiration. Aunt Mercer looked as if she had paid for a seat and received a better performance than expected. Mr. Tresham said low, "That is unjust." Not entirely. A harsher answer than I meant. A truer one than he wished. He looked away first toward the west passage door. Mrs. Lyle needed this room, I know that. Do you? Then where should she have gone if your 3-night suspension had been active? His mouth shut. No answer. Because there was none clean enough for a man who preferred accuracy. I pressed the point because the point was not cruelty. It was the room. Where should Miss Pike have gone when she was followed? Where should Bet stand if a rib-boned man waits near the passage? Where should Mrs. Underhill's envelope be left when her employer's household begins watching her errands? Which need is tidy enough to fit your safety plan? He said nothing. Miss Pike had gone very still. I had said too much. Not to him. Around her. I softened my voice, though not my meaning. You wish to reduce risk. I understand. But you are beginning with the women's movement because it is the part you can command fastest. That landed. I saw the moment he recognized it. It did not make him yield. Men of conscience are sometimes more stubborn than men of vanity because they have better reasons to distrust surrender. He said, then give me another plan. You are very fond of asking women to repair the consequences of your first one. Wes, he said. The bluntness stopped me. He went on. I am. Today I am. Because your plan may be better, and because mine, as you have just explained with unpleasant force, begins at the wrong door. The room shifted. Not enough, but again enough to notice. Aunt Mercer said, he improves when cornered. He has had practice. Miss Tresham muttered. Mr. Tresham ignored both. I returned behind the desk because I needed the barrier, and because the papers lay there, and because Andrew without paper becomes spectacle. Late admission continues, I said. But no woman enters through the west passage unseen from inside. We place a bell pull in the repair room and another in the back passage if Harold can contrive it, Mrs. Valacourt said. Harold can contrive most things when threatened with disappointment. Good. Bet and Clara do not carry messages alone. Miss Pike leaves before dusk unless staying here under stated reason. The stated reason may be copywork for me, not shelter. Miss Pike looked up quickly. I held her gaze. Paperwork, her lips parted. Can you afford that? Mr. Tresham asked. His face tightened again. I lifted a hand before he spoke. Not as rescue. Not as charity. If trustee review requires documented copying, then your office may commission duplicate records from Fenwick's. I will pay Miss Pike from that fee. He considered it. Then nodded once. Agreed. Miss Pike lowered her head, but not before I saw the relief cross her face and frighten her by arriving. Rosen, I said. Miss Tresham straightened. Mr. Tresham said, no. I looked at him. You asked for another plan. He looked as though he regretted many things, beginning with birth order. I continued. Miss Tresham does not make inquiries. She becomes impossible to ignore by being publicly ordinary. She visits the pump room, the dressmaker, and Mrs. Valacourt if invited, always without Mercer or another unimpeachable dragon. I accept dragon, Aunt Mercer said. Unimpeachable is generous. Her only task is to appear unashamed of entering the library. Miss Tresham's face changed. Not excitement now. Something steadier. Something that understood usefulness without theater. That I can do, Mr. Tresham said. That still exposes you. Wes, she answered. But it exposes me to something true. He looked at her then with a kind of helpless anger I knew too well. The anger of a person who cannot protect someone without diminishing them and hates being forced to choose. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "And me?" he asked. "You speak to the side door porter to wage protection, as you proposed. You request minor accounts formally, but not accusingly. You do not confront Pike until paper makes retreat impossible. And you stop announcing restrictions in my room as though women were loose papers to be weighted down." His gaze held mine. "Is that all? How merciful." "I am known for it." This time, despite himself, the corner of his mouth moved. It was the wrong moment to notice his mouth. I noticed it anyway. Then noticed the bell rang. Everyone. A young man entered with too much polish for a clerk and too little humility for a servant. He was fair, fashionably dressed, and smiling in the way of men who learn early that charm need not be kind so long as it arrives first. A strip of dark green ribbon looped through his watch chain. Not hidden. Displayed. Mr. Tresham stepped slightly forward. The young man stopped, took in the room, and then bowed with theatrical ease. "Mrs. Fenwick." I presume I said nothing. His eyes moved to Miss Pike. There. Recognition, or the enjoyment of seeing fear. Mr. Tresham saw it too. The young man smiled wider. "And Miss Tresham. How fortunate." I had hoped to offer reassurance that all this unfortunate talk about the library need not trouble respectable ladies. Miss Tresham's face became very still. Mr. Tresham said, "Underhill, so this was the son. Not a shadow in livery, not a ribbon messenger. A gentleman in daylight, confident enough to walk through the front door, because men like him believe accusation cannot cross the threshold before they do." Mr. Underhill bowed. "Tresham, I hear you have taken a sudden interest in minor building matters." "Not sudden." "No." His eyes flicked to me. "Then perhaps newly influenced." The room understood the insult. It was delicate, of course. All truly dangerous insults in drawing rooms and libraries are. A widow proprietor, male trustee, influence. Proximity, a possible improper reliance wearing the mask of administrative concern. Mr. Tresham's expression did not change. Mine did not either, I hoped. Mrs. Valancourt, however, said, "Young man, if you have come to be unpleasant, at least be specific. My hearing is no longer patient with implication." Underhill blinked. Aunt Mercer gave a satisfied sniff. Mr. Underhill recovered quickly. "I came only to return a book." "You are not a subscriber," I said. Am I not? How exclusive. This is a private circulating library. Not a public shelf for men who mistake doors for invitations. His smile sharpened. "Then perhaps that is the trouble. Too many private arrangements." Miss Pike flinched. I saw Mr. Tresham's hand close at his side. I also saw him stop himself. "Good. Do not give him noise. Make him spend meaning." I opened the ledger. The book. He placed it on the desk. Not one of mine. A volume of sermons. My stomach tightened. Not Mrs. Lyle's hollow book. Another. Or made to resemble one. "Found near the Trimble Lane passage," he said lightly. "One worries what sort of reading circulates after dark." Mr. Tresham said, "Where exactly?" Underhill turned toward him. "Does it matter?" The answer held enough authority to strip some of the smile from him. "Near the old music chamber," Underhill said. "Last night." "By whom?" "A servant." "Name?" "How should I know? Servants blur." Miss Pike went white with anger now, not fear. Mr. Tresham's voice remained even. "Then the evidence is useless." Underhill's eyes narrowed. "Evidence. You brought an object to imply misconduct, without place, witness, time, or ownership. It is only a book in the wrong hand." Mrs. Valancourt murmured, "He does improve." Under looked at her, miscalculated, and dismissed her as old. That was foolish. She smiled. "Mr. Underhill," I said, touching the sermon volume only with a paper wrapper, "shall I enter this as found property delivered by you?" "No need." "But there is every need. You have brought it into a room under trustee review. We must be accurate." Mr. Tresham's gaze came me for one brief second. There, that word again. Accuracy. I wrote carefully. "Volume of sermons, not library property, delivered by Mr. Underhill. Claimed found near old music chamber by unnamed servant. Prior evening, no ownership established." Underhill watched the line form and disliked it more with each word. "Surely that level of record is unnecessary. Most concealment begins with that sentence," I said. His smile vanished. For the first time, I saw him as he likely was in rooms without old women, sisters, trustees, or ledgers not charming, merely indulged long enough to believe impatience was power. He leaned one hand on the desk. "Take care, Mrs. Fenwick. A woman in your position depends upon goodwill." "No," Miss Tresham said before I could speak. "She depends upon records. That is becoming inconvenient for everyone who preferred goodwill." Underhill turned toward her with a soft laugh. "Miss Tresham, your brother should take you home before your generosity is misunderstood." Mr. Tresham stepped then, only once. Not between them exactly, but close enough that Underhill was obliged to reckon with him as a body and not merely a title. "My sister is not your concern." "Not yet," Underhill said. The implication was vile. Mr. Tresham's face went cold in a way I had not yet seen. "Leave." Underhill lifted both hands. "As you wish." He turned to me. "Good day, Mrs. Fenwick. I am sure we shall all be very interested to see how long your doors remain open." I looked at the sermon volume. "Longer than your usefulness, I suspect." Mrs. Valancourt actually laughed. Underhill left. The bell rang after him with an ugly cheer. No one moved until the sound settled. Then Miss Pike sat down abruptly. Miss Tresham crossed to her at once. Mr. Tresham stared at the sermon volume on my desk. "A plant," he said, "to connect your room to improper after-hours passage." And he brought it himself because he expected us to fear the implication more than the record. His eyes lifted to mine. The earlier argument, his proposed restrictions, my anger, all of it remained between us. But now another thing stood there too. Proof in daylight. Underhill had given us arrogance where we had needed connection. I opened the sermon volume with the paper knife. This one was hollow too. Inside lay nothing but a torn scrap of green silk and a folded bedding slip from the Crescent Card rooms. Mr. Tresham looked at it. Then he said, very quietly, "Now we have him." "No," I answered, though my pulse had quickened. "Now we have the door he used. We still need the room behind it." He nodded. This time, he did not argue. The bedding slip had been folded twice, not carefully. Men who plant evidence seldom respect paper. They respect only the injury they hope paper will do once discovered in the wrong hand. I lifted it with the edge of the knife and flattened it on the blotter. The ink had smeared at one corner, likely from damp. The printed heading was unmistakable: Crescent Card Room Private Book. Beneath it, in a hand not intended for women, stood a name, a sum, and a horse entered for an afternoon race outside Bristol. Underhill. Not his full name, only EU, written as if initials were sufficient protection among men who had all agreed to pretend they did not know one another too plainly. Mr. Tresham bent over the desk. "Do not touch it." His hand stopped. A small pause followed. Then he drew it back. The room noticed. "So did I." "I was not going to," he said. "You were." "I was going to move it nearer the light." "With your fingers." His mouth tightened. "An unforgivable procedural lapse." "Not unforgivable. A merely male." Mrs. Valacourt made a sound into her handkerchief that was not at all a cough. Miss Tresham's face remained pale, but her eyes had sharpened. She stood beside Miss Pike, one hand on the back of the governess's chair, not touching her, but near enough to make retreat possible. Aunt Mercer had placed herself near the front window, where she could watch both the street and the room, which made her, in my opinion, the only truly military mind present. Mr. Tresham looked at the hollow sermon volume, the green scrap, and the bedding slip. Underhill has just connected himself to the Crescent Card room and to the planted object. No, but enough. For what? For leverage. I did not like the word. He saw that before I spoke. "Not against you," he said. "Words are promiscuous. They change partners easily. Then call it pressure. There is no better. Then call it a door." I looked at him. He held my gaze, and I could see the irritation in him, but also the effort to be exact in the way the room now required. He had begun to understand that when men used the wrong word in a female refuge, the walls repeated it back in the most dangerous form. "A door to what?" I asked. "To the private booking ledgers, to the card room book, to Pake," Miss Tresham said, "and to Underhill's mother." Mr. Tresham turned. No, she lifted her brows. "That was quick, because you are thinking of calling." "I am thinking she should be made to know what her son does. She will know exactly enough to protect him and injure everyone else." Aunt Mercer said, "True." Miss Tresham looked offended by the truth, which did not make it less true. I folded a clean sheet around the bedding slip and noted its condition, placement, and delivery. The act of writing steadied me. It often does. Ink cannot fix danger, but it can prevent danger from being renamed by the first confident man who arrives after the fact. "Mr. Tresham," I said. "What did Underhill mean by not yet?" The room tightened. He did not pretend ignorance. "I do not know." "Guess." His eyes moved very briefly to his sister. Miss Tresham saw it. "So did everyone else." She straightened. "Mem." "Rosamond." "No. Do not wrap it." "Me." Mr. Tresham looked as if he would rather take the planted sermon volume apart with his teeth than answer. "Aunt Mercer did it for him. Underhill's mother has been sniffing around Lady Sefton's circle since winter," she said. "If Sefton withdraws her son, and if Rosamond's name becomes unsettled enough to require rapid repair, a woman like Mrs. Underhill made her own son look suddenly useful." Miss Tresham stared at her. Then she laughed once, sharp and unbelieving. "Edward Underhill." Mrs. Valacourt said, "There are worse men." Aunt Mercer looked at her. Mrs. Valacourt amended, "Fewer than one would like." Miss Tresham's color rose. "He thinks he may damage my prospects and then offer himself as the solution." I said nothing, because yes, the shape was too familiar to need explanation. Make a woman appear difficult, uncertain, socially bruised, and then present a narrower door as mercy. Men had used worse tactics for less reward than a Tresham connection. Mr. Tresham's face had gone dangerous, not never loud. Dangerous in the way iron becomes dangerous when finally heated enough to bend. "He will not come near you." Miss Tresham turned on him. "That is not the point." "It is very much one of the points." "No. The point is that he believes he made the point, is that the same men trying to make Mrs. Fenwick's library look unsafe are quite prepared to use my reputation as a lane marker in their own dirty road." "Rosamond." I am not finished. Of trembled, but she did not lower it. "Yesterday you wanted me home, safe, proper, out of this, and yet I was already in it. I was in it the moment Lady Sefton's note arrived. I was in at the moment that man walked through the door and used my future as if it were a chair he might pull closer if needed. The words hit him harder because she did not cry. I recognized that too. Men often know what to do with tears. They are less prepared for a woman who remains dry-eyed while describing the theft of her choices. Miss Pike whispered, "I am sorry." Every head turned. She shrank at once, but she had spoken and the room had heard. Miss Tresham moved closer to her. "Why?" "Because I said about the livery. About Underhill. Miss Pike," she said with unexpected firmness. "If my position can be damaged by the truth of a ribbon, then it was not as safe as everyone kept telling me." The governess looked at her with astonished gratitude and fear. They are often twins in women who cannot afford gifts. Mr. Tresham turned away and stared toward the west passage door. I could almost see the two instincts battling in him, to lock every door around his sister and to break every door that had made the locking seem necessary. He said at last, "I will speak to Underhill." "No," I said. He turned back slowly. "No, you are denying me many satisfying errors today. They would remain errors even if satisfying. He threatened you in your own room. He tried to frighten me into mishandling proof. Do not complete his errand." That silenced him, though not peacefully. I pointed to the sermon volume. "He brought us a planted object. If you confront him, he becomes insulted innocence. If you confront Pike too soon, Pike cleans the room ledgers. If you speak to Mrs. Underhill, she moves faster than we can document. We use what he gave us. We do not reward him with a scene." Mrs. Valacourt said, "She is right." Aunt Mercer added, "Unknowingly so." "But then what?" "The side door porter," I said. "Before Pike reaches him." He nodded once. "No, and not here. At your rooms." "No rue. Too visible." "Then where?" For the first time that morning, Mrs. Valacourt smiled. "In my carriage." We all looked at her. She looked back, untroubled. "It is large, ugly, and no one of sense approaches it unless ordered. Harold can bring the porter to the rear of the crescent on the pretext of a wheel problem. Mr. Tresham may question him inside. Mrs. Fenwick may be present, since this room seems to suffer whenever gentlemen interpret women's evidence without the inconvenience of women." Mr. Tresham said, "That is irregular." Mrs. Valacourt leaned on her cane. "So is blackmail by sermon book. We adapt." Aunt Mercer gave an approving nod. "I like you better than I expected. I do not require it. Even better." And the plan moved quickly after that, which made it more frightening, not less. Harold was summoned from whatever shadow Mrs. Valacourt kept him in when not using him as a listening post. He was a square man of indeterminate age, excellent calves, and the expression of one who had decided long ago that dignity was possible only if one ignored most of what employers said. He received Mrs. Valacourt's instructions with no visible surprise, which told me this was far from the most irregular thing she had ever asked him to do. Mr. Tresham wrote a short note to his own groom, then destroyed it and gave verbal instructions instead. Good. He was learning. Miss Tresham was sent nowhere, because she refused to be sent, but Aunt Mercer took command of her with the ease of a woman who knew that obedience could sometimes be substituted with relocation. They would remain in the library visible from the front, while Mrs. Valacourt occupied her chair like a legal fixture. Miss Pike would stay in the repair room and copy labels until her hands steadied. I locked the planted sermon volume in my lower drawer. The betting slip remained wrapped inside my ledger. Before we left, Mr. Tresham paused at the desk. "If the porter confirms Pike's role, this becomes larger by evening." "It was already larger," I said. "By evening, we may have enough paper to make others admit." Why, he looked down at me. There was something in his face I disliked seeing, because it made me want to trust the wrong parts of him. "You should not have to stand in that carriage and help question a frightened servant because men used your door for their convenience." "No," I said. "I should not." An apology flickered behind his eyes. He did not offer it. Better. Instead he said, "But you will. Because you do not trust me to ask correctly." "Partly. And the rest." "Because frightened servants sometimes answer women more accurately than gentlemen." He accepted that too. We left through the front door separately. Not dramatically separately. Practically separately. He first, with his hat and official coat and the appearance of a man about trusty business. I followed 4 minutes later with a parcel of damaged bindings in my arms, because a woman carrying books is the least interesting object in Bath until someone wants to accuse her of thinking. Mrs. Valacourt's carriage stood near the rear corner, exactly as advertised. Large, ugly, and aggressively unfashionable. Harold had positioned it with one wheel slightly turned and himself crouched beside it, insulting a bolt in a low voice. A thin man in a porter's apron stood nearby, ringing his cap. The side door porter. His name, I learned, was Mallow. Not old, young, thin at the wrists, red about the eyes. A man whose wages likely lived 3 days ahead of hunger and never more. Mr. Tresham opened the carriage door. Inside, Mallow looked ready to bolt. I stepped forward. "Mr. Mallow, no one is taking you to a magistrate." His eyes darted to me. "No. Not if you tell the truth before men with better boots arrange it for you." That seemed to frighten him less than Mr. Tresham's silence. He climbed in. The carriage smelled of leather, lavender, and Mrs. Valcourt's uncompromising opinions. Mr. Tresham sat opposite Mallow. I sat beside the door. Harold remained outside with the wheel, loudly continuing his quarrel with the bolt for the benefit of passersby. Mr. Tresham began. You admit men through the Trimble Lane side door after public hours. Mallow swallowed. I admit them when I am told. Be whom? One, the green token is shown. I took out the ribbon strips, still wrapped. Like this. His face drained. Yes, Mom. Mr. Tresham's voice was calm. What does the token signify? That they are to be let through to the supper room or music room without entry in the front book. Neems. I don't know most, Sir Underhill. Mallow looked at his cap. Mr. Tresham leaned forward slightly. If you lie, you will not be protected from the men who told you to lie. The porter flinched. I said, if you tell the truth fully, Mr. Tresham can place your wages elsewhere before Pike dismisses you. Mr. Tresham glanced at me. I looked back. He had proposed it. I was spending his promise before he could dress it in caution. He said, Wes, if you answer fully. Mallow's eyes moved between us. Then he nodded. Mr. Underhill comes. The younger one. Sometimes 2 nights a week. Sometimes with others. They use the supper room. Not always, for sometimes ladies come. What ladies? Mr. Tresham asked. Mallow's mouth closed. I said, not names if they are brought under pressure or employment. Mr. Tresham's gaze cut to me, then back to Mallow. Were they paid? Some not. Some cried. The carriage seemed to shrink. Outside, Harold struck metal with theatrical irritation. Mr. Tresham's face had gone still in a way I did not like. Not because it was cold, because beneath the stillness was fury with nowhere clean to go. Pike knew, he asked. Pike arranged rooms, something for it, I think. Mr. Hale knew about the suppers, maybe not the rest. Hale, I said. The accounts Clamello nodded. Keeps the second sheets. Mr. Tresham's eyes sharpened. What second sheets? 4 charges not in the public room book. We're. Mallow hesitated. I leaned forward. Mr. Mallow, if you protect the hiding place, you protect Pike. He shut his eyes. Behind the old music cupboard. Bottom drawer false back. A youthful Tresham said, who placed the note under Mrs. Fenwick's door? Mallow shook his head quickly. Not me. Green. That's what they call him. Not his name. Erlenman wears plain coat. Sometimes ribbon, sometimes not. He carries messages from Underhill's lot to Pike. Where can he be found? Be found? I don't know. Mr. Tresham's stare did not alter. I swear, sir, he comes and goes. Mostly by the Mews. He drinks at the Black Hart sometimes. I wrote it all down in small, hard lines. Pike, green token, and entered rooms. Second sheets, false back. Green messenger, Black Hart. Paper began to make room for truth. Mallow looked at me then, not at Mr. Tresham. Is Mrs. Fenwick closing? No, I said. His relief was immediate and shameful, as if he had feared not only for himself but for the convenience the library gave decent staff forced to work near indecent rooms. Mr. Tresham saw that too. You have used the library side arrangements, he said. Mallow's face reddened. One sister, once she was in service near Gay Street, needed somewhere to wait before the mail coach. I nodded. One more invisible reason. One more woman who had passed through the room without society ever needing to know she had been saved from a worse hour. Mr. Tresham sat back. Mr. Mallow, you will return to your post as if nothing has changed. By 6 this evening, a man of mine will speak to you about alternative employment until the matter is settled. You will not warn Pake. No, sir, you will not speak to Underhill. No, sir, you will not attempt bravery. Mallow blinked. I said, that means if threatened you leave by the safest route, not the proudest one. Wes! The carriage door opened. A herald appeared. Beg pardon. Wheels miraculously recovered. Miracles are so often well-timed, I said. Mallow slipped out first and vanished toward the service passage. Mr. Tresham remained seated. I gathered my notes. We have enough to find the second sheets, I said. And if the second sheets name Underhill clearly, then the complaint collapses. No, I said. Then it fights. He looked at me. A cornered complaint becomes moral outrage, I said. Thee will say the library gathered women of mixed respectability, that it encouraged secrets, that it interfered with household authority, that bruised wives and curious governesses and poor girls used books as cover for disobedience. Some of that will even be true if spoken by people who think obedience is the highest good. His gaze did not move from mine. And you? What of me? What will they say of you? I smiled then, though there was no pleasure in it. That I am a widow who made herself useful to a gentleman trustee. That I admitted improper women, concealed names, used side passages, wrote private notes to a male subscriber, and confused morality because my own position was insufficiently secure to recognize it in others. Face tightened. They will be wrong. They will be efficient. He said nothing. Outside the carriage, Bath went on with its ordinary damp morning. Wheels rolled. A lady laughed somewhere too brightly. Harold muttered to a horse. All the machinery of respectability continued, indifferent to the uglier machinery now exposed beneath it. Mr. Tresham opened the carriage door, then paused. I will not let them make you the easiest explanation. I looked at him for a moment. That was the kind of promise a woman wants to believe and should not accept too quickly. Do not let them make the library the easiest explanation, I said. I am only one woman. The room is more useful. His eyes held mine. No, he said quietly. Not only. The words were too soft for the morning we had. So I stepped down before they could settle where they might do damage. Aunt Mercer was waiting at the corner when I returned to the library, which suggested Miss Tresham had inherited family stubbornness honestly. Well, she asked. We have the side door porter, I said. And the location of hidden accounts. And Aunt Mercer's face changed into something almost cheerful. Excellent. I have just received a note from Lady Sefton. My stomach tightened. Miss Tresham stood behind her in the doorway, paper in hand, face pale but steady. What does it say? I asked. Miss Tresham answered. Her son's call is withdrawn. Mr. Tresham, who had come up behind me, went still. Miss Tresham looked at him, then at me. Not postponed. Withdraw it was. No polite pause. No waiting for facts. No committee conclusion. Respectability had decided that smoke was as good as fire if the smoke drifted near a woman's name. Mr. Tresham said, Rosamond. She lifted the note before he could comfort her. No, let it stand. We now know what caution costs. Her voice shook only on the last word. Then she folded Lady Sefton's letter and placed it on my desk beside the green ribbons. Another document. Another wound counted in ink. Lady Sefton's note looked harmless beside the green ribbons. That was the most insulting part of it. A threat has the decency to announce itself as ugly. A social withdrawal arrives on cream paper, folded cleanly, with regret shaped into phrases fine enough to pass through a drawing room without leaving mud on the carpet. Miss Tresham had placed it on my desk with more care than it deserved. Now it lay between the torn ribbon, the betting slip, and my record of Mr. Mallow's statement, as if all forms of violence naturally belonged in one file once women began sorting them properly. Mr. Tresham did not touch it. His eyes stayed on his sister. Rosamond, he said, and stop. Good. There was nothing to say that would not reduce the loss by trying to improve its sound. Miss Tresham removed her gloves slowly. Do not look as if someone has died. Edward Sefton is not dead. Merely unavailable. Mercer snorted. I am less interesting than advertised. Mrs. Valancourt said. Most men are. Miss Tresham's mouth trembled once, then steadied. I know he was not the great romance of my life. No. Mr. Tresham said quietly, but the choice was yours to make badly if you wished. That did something to her. She looked at him, and for the first time since the note arrived, her composure nearly broke. Yes, she said. That is the part. A silence moved through the room, gentler this time and worse for being gentle. I knew that kind of injury. Not loss of love, but loss of room in which love might have become possible, ridiculous, disappointing, useful, or nothing at all by one's own discovery. Women are expected to bear that sort of theft with gratitude if the thief calls it prudence. Mr. Tresham turned toward the desk. We have to move carefully now. The words tightened everything in me before I could stop them. Mrs. Fenwick. No, I said again. Not if carefully means slowly, it means correctly. It usually does until it means late. His jaw set. Underhill has already shown he is willing to plant evidence, threaten your door, and use Rosamond's prospects to apply pressure. Pykegate may warn him before we recover the hidden sheets. Green may vanish. Mallow may be frightened out of truth. If we rush, we lose proof. And if we wait, we secure it. Or we give them time to turn Miss Tresham's lost call into a public warning and my library into the cause. Miss Tresham picked up Lady Sefton's note again. That has already begun. Mr. Tresham did not look at her. Second mistake. He was a man trained to handle crisis by narrowing the number of moving pieces. Unfortunately, every woman in the room knew what it felt like to become one of those pieces. You will not make this right, I said. Be asking women to stand still while you arrange better paper. His temper showed then, not in volume, in the clean line of his mouth. And you will not make this right by throwing open every door because delay feels like surrender. Feels. Wes. Feels. He stepped nearer the desk. You are angry, Mrs. Fenwick. You have cause. But anger is not a plan. Nor is masculine caution when dressed as strategy. That landed badly. The room felt the impact. Mrs. Valancourt's hand closed over her cane. Aunt Mercer's eyes sharpened. Miss Pike, still pale near the repair room door, looked as if she wished herself small enough to fit between pages. Mr. Tresham's voice lowered. You mistake me again. Do I? Wes. He held my gaze. I am not trying to silence you. I am trying to keep the evidence from being dismissed as female agitation before it reaches the room where it can do legal harm. That is a polished sentence. It is also true. Truth can be polished into usefulness for the wrong side. Then help me prevent that instead of accusing me of holding the cloth. The words stopped me. Because they were not wrong, I hated that. Miss Tresham came to the desk and placed her palm over Lady Sefton's note. Both of you are very impressive when being intolerable, but I would like my ruined morning to purchase more than an argument. Aunt Mercer murmured, sensible girl. Miss Tresham looked at me first. Mrs. Fenwick, if we expose them too soon, they will say you are hysterical, mercenary, or improper. And Gabriel, if we wait too long, they will decide what I am before I have spoken. His face tightened. No. Then we do both. Paper first, but today. Public pressure second, but not through gossip. Through procedure. Through the very dull things men rely on because they believe women cannot make them sharp. Mrs. Valcourt smiled. Receipts, ledgers, and elderly women. Exactly, Miss Tresham said. Mr. Tresham looked at his sister as if he had not expected to admire her quite so much and found the discovery inconvenient. What procedure? He asked. I answered, because by then I saw it too. The charity reading tonight, he turned to me. No. You do say that often, because people around me keep proposing ruin. The public charity reading is held in the Crescent Assembly Room, I said. It includes trustees, patrons, subscribers, and every woman currently pretending not to know there is a complaint against the library. And you propose to make an accusation there? No. I propose to make absence visible. His expression changed slightly. Miss Tresham leaned forward. How? The library was asked to provide books for the charity table, was it not? Wes, she said. I saw the notice. I looked at Mr. Tresham. If I withdraw Fenwick's books quietly, I look guilty. If I provide them, the room uses my respectability while threatening my lease, so I attend with the books publicly as agreed. Mrs. Valcourt attends. Aunt Mercer attends. Miss Tresham attends if she chooses. She does not, Mr. Tresham said. I do. Miss Tresham said at the same time. They looked at each other. I continued before blush became familial. No accusation. No speeches. But the charity table will include only books on household economy, travel, sermons, and moral conduct. Mrs. Valcourt's brows rose. That is disappointingly respectable. Wes, I said. And each book will have a lending slip inside with a copy date from the unanswered corridor letters. Mr. Tresham went still. I felt rather than saw his attention sharpen. Not names, I said. Only dates, room entries, and the phrase a safety concern previously submitted to the Crescent trustees. Oh. Aunt Mercer gave a low laugh. Oh, that is viciously dull. Thank you, Mr. Tresham said slowly. Anyone opening a book at the charity table sees that the library warned the trustees before the complaint. And that the issue concerns building safety, not novels. And the dates align with supper room charges. Only if someone has the account copies. He looked at the ledger stack. I do. Then you need the second sheets before tonight. His face tightened again, though this time not at me. Miss Tresham said, while everyone is at the charity reading, Pike may move them. Which is why, I said. We must recover them before. Mr. Tresham drew a breath. I go now. No, I said. His eyes returned to me with wary disbelief. Again, if you go alone, Pike bars the drawer, claims trustee confusion, and sends for whichever man gives him courage. If I go, he calls it female intrusion. If we go together with Mrs. Valcourt and Aunt Mercer as witnesses seeking misplaced charity room accounts, he must either comply or make the refusal public. Mrs. Valcourt stood with alarming speed for a woman who complained of knees in bad weather. I am ready. Aunt Mercer also rose, as am I. Mr. Tresham looked from one elderly woman to the other. This is becoming a procession. It is becoming evidence, I said. Miss Tresham lifted Lady Sefton's note. On I. You stay here, Mr. Tresham said. She opened her mouth. He lifted one hand. Not because you are fragile. Because if Pike sends word to Underhill and someone comes here while we are gone, the room needs a Tresham visibly unashamed inside it. Miss Tresham closed her mouth. Then, very slowly, she nodded. You could have begun with that. Wes, he said. I am noticing the pattern. Aunt Mercer said. Men improve so late in the day. We left the library under Mrs. Valcourt's command. That is the only honest way to describe it. Mr. Tresham may have had trustee authority. I may have had the room records, and Aunt Mercer may have had the air of a woman who could insult a bishop into signing a confession. But Mrs. Valcourt had Harold, the carriage, and the serene certainty that rules were what one used when furniture needed moving. The committee office occupied a narrow room near the front of the Crescent building, furnished with a sloping desk, 2 chairs, a locked cabinet, and the faint, institutional smell of old ink and men who believed economy meant refusing women coal. Mr. Pike was inside when we entered. He stood too quickly. That was useful. Mr. Tresham, he said, was not informed that I was coming. Mr. Tresham asked. No. Mr. Pike's eyes moved to me, then to Mrs. Valcourt, then Aunt Mercer. This is a private office. Mrs. Valcourt sat without invitation. Not anymore. Aunt Mercer remained standing. I disliked the chair. Mr. Pike's face tightened. He was a square, soft-handed man with careful side whiskers and the moral expression of a clerk who had learned to confuse keys with virtue. Mr. Tresham placed one sheet on the desk. I require the charity room account book, minor expense ledger, and any supplementary sheets concerning the music chamber, private supper room, rear door porterage, and Trimble Lane repairs for the last 6 months. Mr. Pike's eyes flickered. Supplementary sheets. There. A tiny movement, nearly pleasureless, entirely proof. I am afraid the accounts are under preparation, he said. For whom? The committee. I am acting trustee. Of course, but these things must be produced in proper order. Mrs. Valcourt tapped her cane. Young man, proper order is what people invoke when improper order has been discovered first. Mr. Pike flushed. Madam, do not madam me in a room this cold. Aunt Mercer said. It is cold. It has always been cold, Pike said, losing patience by half an inch. The committee declined additional fuel. Write that down, Mrs. Valcourt said to me. The committee freezes its clerks. It may explain their moral stiffness. I did not write it down. I did, however, move to the cabinet. Mr. Pike stepped toward me. Mrs. Fenwick. That is not. Mr. Tresham moved between us. No flurries. No raise voix. Give me the key. Pike looked at him, then at the two old women, then at me. He made the calculation badly. He saw females' inconvenience and possible embarrassment. He did not see that every second of refusal was another line in the record. The key is with Mr. Hale. No, I said. It is in your lower waistcoat pocket. Everyone looked at me. Pike went red. I had seen the outline when he stood, a small brass pressure against cloth. Men with keys always imagine women do not notice the shape of withheld access. Mr. Tresham held out his hand. The key landed in it 5 seconds later. The cabinet opened. Inside were the ordinary books first. Room hire. Committee minutes. Public subscription charges. Nothing remarkable except the neatness. Below, behind a stack of old circulars, was a second drawer. Locked. Pike said too quickly. That is private, Mrs. Valacourt said. Excellent. Mr. Tresham tried the same key. No use. Aunt Mercer moved to the desk. His fob. Pike's hand flew to his watch chain. Harold, appearing somehow in the doorway without having been summoned, said, "Shall I fetch a locksmith, ma'am?" Mrs. Valacourt smiled at Pike. The second key appeared. The drawer opened. Inside lay the second sheets. Not many enough. Loose papers tied by month. Arth charged by initials. Green token notations. Rear door admissions. Private supper entries. Cash payments. Underhill's initials repeated often enough to make denial difficult. Pike's own small marks in the corner of several sheets. Beside 2 entries, LF warned, use library complaint if needed. LF, I felt the room sharpen. Who is L? I asked. Pike said nothing. Mr. Tresham lifted one sheet. Who is LF? Still nothing. Aunt Mercer leaned over the papers. Leonard Farr, perhaps. The Mr. Tresham looked at her. The magistrate's nephew. And a thoroughly rancid boy, she said. I remember his mother. Mrs. Valacourt sniffed. I remember him. Worse. Mr. Pike sat down as if his knees had been cut. There it was. Not only Underhill. Not only Pike. Young men with protected names. A room circuit. A complaint held like a weapon against the one female run space that made movement visible. Mr. Tresham gathered the sheets. Pike found his voice. You cannot remove private committee material. I can. You will ruin men for youthful foolishness. Mrs. Valacourt rose. The change in her was so complete that even Mr. Tresham looked startled. No, she said. Youthful foolishness is falling in love with a dancing master, losing at whist, or wearing orange near candlelight. Paying to enter unrecorded rooms, frightening women near side doors, planting books, threatening a widow's business, and using respectable girls' futures as cover is not foolishness. It is practice for worse. Pike had no answer. Good. Mr. Tresham folded the sheets into his case. You are suspended from record access pending committee review. You have no authority to. I have enough to remove a key from a man who lied about having it. Pike went silent. I took one of the public charity notices from the side table and laid it before him. Fenwick's will still provide the books tonight, I said. His eyes lifted. And every person who opens one will discover that the library warned this office about side door danger months before the moral complaint was filed. Pike's face showed fear then. Not of guilt. Of exposure. That told me we were right. We returned to Fenwick's with the second sheet sealed inside Mr. Tresham's case, and Mrs. Valacourt in a mood so bright it bordered on indecent. Miss Tresham met us at the library door. Well, Mr. Tresham set the case on my desk and opened it. She read only enough to understand. Then she looked away. Not because she was shocked by male vice. I think she had passed shock some time ago. Because proof, when it comes, often confirms that one's life was nearly altered by people even smaller than fear imagined. Miss Pike stood in the doorway to the repair room. Is it enough? She asked. Mr. Tresham answered before I could. It is enough to begin properly, I said. And dangerously. Wes, he said. No softness. No denial. Good. We spent the next 2 hours preparing the charity table slips. No names, no accusations, dates, prior warnings, room charges, safety concerns. Book as if morality itself had agreed to carry the evidence. Sermons. Household Mammals in the North. A volume on female education so dull that its sudden usefulness felt like revenge. Near dusk a note arrived. This one bore Underhill's hand. Mr. Tresham opened it, read, and went very still. What? Miss Tresham asked. He gave the note to me. It was brief. If the widow proceeds tonight, the first story will not be about the card rooms. It will be about Larkspur. The room seemed to tilt. My hand closed around the paper. Not because of the threat to me. Not only that. Because Larkspur was not merely a name. It was a private door between us, and someone had found the handle. Mr. Tresham's face had gone cold. Miss Tresham looked from him to me. What does that mean? Neither of us answered. Mrs. Valacourt did. It means, she said, that the cowards have run out of ledgers and begun reaching for hearts. Larkspur. The name lay in Underhill's note like a hand placed where it had no right to be. For several seconds no one spoke. Not because no one understood, because everyone understood enough to make speech dangerous. Miss Tresham looked from her brother to me, then to the paper in my hand. Gabriel. He took the note back before I had decided whether to give it. That was his first mistake, not the taking. The speed of it. The room saw him protect something. A secret. A name. A shared age. The exact thing Underhill had intended the note to expose without yet exposing it. Mrs. Valcourt's eyes narrowed. Aunt Mercer said nothing at all, which from her was nearly thunder. Miss Pike stood in the repair room doorway, looking frightened without understanding why. I was grateful she did not understand. A woman with too little power should not be asked to carry one more person's reputation before supper. Mr. Tresham folded the note and put it in his pocket. "No," I said. His gaze came to mine. "It is addressed to me. It threatens me. It threatens both of us. Then both of us should see it." His jaw tightened. "You have seen it. That is not the same as keeping it." The words were too sharp for the room, but the room had already sharpened itself. Miss Tresham looked at her brother. "What is Larkspur?" He did not answer. That was his second mistake. I could have answered for him. I did not. Not yet. A woman may be honest without offering her throat before the knife has been named. Mr. Tresham turned toward the charity table, books laid open on my desk. The slips we had prepared lay beside them in neat stacks, dates, warnings, room charges, unanswered letters, all carefully stripped of names and still dangerous enough to shift the evening if placed before the right eyes. "We stop," he said. The sentence entered the room like a lock turning. "No, Mrs. Fenwick, do not say my name as if it were an unruly item in your account book." His face hardened, but his voice remained low. "F. Underhill has the Larkspur correspondence he can make tonight about private impropriety rather than the Crescent records. He can try. He will do more than try. He will say a widow proprietor exchanged private notes with the trustee now defending her lease. He will imply influence, attachment, partiality, perhaps worse. Once the room hears that, every slip in those books becomes suspect." I knew that. Of course I knew that. Every woman in the room knew that a female argument may be defeated not by disproving it, but by making the woman herself sound socially inconvenient. I said. "Then we answer first. With what? A confession that we wrote one another under a borrowing name." Miss Tresham inhaled. "There it was. Not the whole, but enough," Mrs. Valcourt said. "Ah," Aunt Mercer said, idiotic. "I did not know whether she meant us or Underhill. Possibly both." Mr. Tresham's eyes flicked toward his sister. "Rosamond," she said. "Do not begin by managing my face. I'm not the scandal. Apparently, books are." His mouth closed. "Good girl," he turned back to me. "If we move tonight, you become the story. If we do not move tonight, the women who rely on this room become invisible again. For one night. That is always how it begins. For one night," he repeated more forcefully now, "while I secure Underhill's copies and determine what he possesses. And during that night." He looked toward the west passage. Late entry remains suspended. The room went cold. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because he had traveled so far since entering my library and still arrived under pressure. At the first door men always choose to close. Ada, my Christian name. In that room, in front of women who knew too much, too little, or exactly enough. His third mistake. The silence after it was brutal. Miss Tresham looked away. Mrs. Valcourt did not. Aunt Mercer's expression suggested she had been waiting for him to stumble and was disappointed only by the predictability of the fall. I spoke carefully because if I did not, Ainger would do the work and do it badly. "You will not call me that here." Regret crossed his face at once. "Not enough. Mrs. Fenwick," he said, quieter. "No, too late to repair the handle after opening the door." His jaw worked. "That was not my intention. Intention has been borrowing too much credit in this building." He took the blow because he knew he had earned it. Then, because he was still a man in fear, he continued. "I am trying to keep Underhill from destroying your credibility. You are trying to preserve the route through which you believe credibility may safely travel. At whose expense?" He stopped. There it was. He knew the answer. I saw it reach him, but not deeply enough to change him before the next sentence. "At the expense of one night's access," he said. Miss Pike made the smallest sound he heard it. "So did I." I turned toward her. "Miss Pike." She tried to straighten. "I am well." A lie, poorly made, entirely brave. "Do you need the room tonight?" Her hands tightened in the folds of her skirt. Mr. Tresham went still. Miss Pike looked at him, then at me, then at the west door as if the door itself might answer without making her culpable. "I was asked not to return to the Hadley house before 10, she said. Miss Tresham's face changed. "Oui." Miss Pike's voice grew smaller. "Mr. Hadley has guests before then. Mrs. Hadley said I am not needed and should not be seen crossing the hall while they are there." The room understood the shape of that too quickly. A governess not needed. Not to be seen. Turned into absence for male comfort inside the house that paid her wages. Mr. Tresham closed his eyes once. I did not spare him. "So," I said, "which one night shall she spend where your temporary caution does not see her?" He opened his eyes. "I can arrange." You do not know what I was about to say. I know the first word was "I." That silenced him. Mrs. Valcourt tapped her cane once. "Clean hit." Aunt Mercer murmured, "Overdue." Mr. Tresham looked from Miss Pike to his sister, then to the papers on the desk. I watched him search for an arrangement that would satisfy safety without surrendering control, and because I had lived long enough under arrangements named for my benefit, I knew before he spoke that I would hate it. "Miss Pike may stay at my aunt's lodgings tonight," he said, "under Rosamond's supervision. Mrs. Lyle can be sent for if needed. Bet and Clara may be escorted by Harold. For tonight, the library need not serve as refuge." Need. I repeated. The word came out very softly. He knew then knew, but he did not retreat. Only for tonight. I looked around the room. Miss Pike humiliated by becoming the example. Miss Tresham, torn between gratitude for a practical solution and horror at the fact that the solution removed the library from its own function. Mrs. Valancourt, furious and old enough not to waste it. Aunt Mercer, watching her nephew as if deciding whether he was worth saving from his own best intentions. And Mr. Tresham, standing among us with Underhill's threat in his pocket and the face of a man who had just chosen a smaller harm because he could not bear the larger one. That, I think, was what hurt most. Not that he was careless. That he was not. Careful men can do damage with cleaner hands. I took the charity slips from the desk and began gathering them. He stepped forward. What are you doing? Removing these from your reach. His face hardened. Mrs. Fenwick, you have decided tonight cannot proceed. I have heard you. You cannot still intend to act. I can intend many things silently. It is one of the accomplishments widowhood improves. He held out his hand. Give me the slips. The room stopped breathing. I looked at his hand, then at his face. This is not a game. Do you imagine I have mistaken it for one? If those slips are placed tonight after Underhill exposes the correspondence, the library may not survive the week. If they are not placed tonight, the complaint survives unchallenged into the committee room already dressed as morality. I can challenge it. Weiss, I said. That is the problem. His eyes narrowed. No, I said. You alone. Here was the heart of it. He wanted to carry the evidence into the correct room. He wanted to fight the right men with the right papers in the right sequence. He wanted to prevent Underhill from making me visible in the wrong shape. He wanted, with all the discipline in him, to save the argument by removing the woman easiest to stain, me, and after me the room. He said, you think I mean to erase you. I think you mean to protect me by making me strategically absent. That is not erasure. It is written in the same hand. The words struck him. For a moment I thought he might yield, truly yield. Not because I had defeated him, but because he saw the pattern. Then he looked at Miss Tresham and Miss Pike at the note in his pocket, and fear overcame recognition. I cannot allow it. There it was again. Ullo. This time he heard himself. Too late. I folded the slips into my ledger and closed it. Then we are finished for the moment. His face went very still. Do not do this. Do what? Turn disagreement into rupture. I almost smiled. It would have been an ugly smile. Men do enjoy naming the break only after women stop bending. Miss Tresham whispered. Mrs. Fenwick. I looked at her, and my anger softened for one breath. None of this was hers. Too much of it would cost her anyway. I am sorry, I said. For what? She asked. For the fact that you are watching the shape of your own life in advance. Her eyes filled. She did not let tears fall. Mr. Trem said, that is cruel. What is? I said. It is. I lifted my cloak from the hook beside the desk. Mrs. Valancourt stood. Where are you going? To deliver books. Mr. Tresham moved before thinking and placed himself between me and the front door. Not close enough to touch. Close enough to stop. The whole room saw it. His face changed the moment he realized what he had done. I said nothing. I did not need to. He stepped aside. The space he left hurt more than if he had remained in it, because now he understood. Mrs. Fenwick, he said, voice low. Only that. I went to the shelves and selected 6 books myself. Sermons, household economy, female education, travels, moral essays. A volume of poems no one could condemn without sounding barbarous. Into each, I placed one of the prepared slips. Mr. Tresham watched. He did not stop me. Perhaps because he had no right. Perhaps because the room had shown him the cost of attempting it. Perhaps because some part of him, buried under fear, still wanted me to be right. When the books were tied in brown paper, I gave the parcel to Harold, who had appeared in the doorway with the timing of Providence and better calves. To the Crescent Charity Table, I said, directly. Deliver them to the steward setting the table, not to Mr. Pike, not to any gentleman. If stopped, say Mrs. Valancourt sent you. Mrs. Valancourt said, with pleasure. Harold bowed. Wes, Mum. Mr. Tresham's voice cut in. Harold, the footman, stopped. Everyone did. Mr. Tresham looked at the parcel, then at me. For 1 second I thought he would countermand me. Instead he said, if any man attempts to take those before they reach the table, you will inform him they are under trustee protection. Harold looked from him to me. Mrs. Valancourt said, well, take both authorities, man. It may make you walk straighter. Harold left with the books. I should have felt triumph. I felt only tired. Mr. Tresham came no closer. You should not attend tonight. And there we are. You have placed the evidence. Let it work without making yourself a target. I have been a target since the first complaint. This is different. Wes. Now you care. The sentence escaped before I could measure it. His face changed. The room did too. Too much truth had entered into little language. I wished I could call it back. Not because it was false. Because it was not useful enough to justify the wound, he said, almost inaudibly. Yes, that was worse. I turned away first. I will attend tonight, I said. Not to accuse. Not to perform. To stand beside my own books. Then I will attend also. Of course. You are a trustee. No, he said. Not as that. I did not ask what he meant. I could not afford the answer. Miss Tresham crossed the room then and took up Lady Sefton's note from the desk. She folded it carefully and placed it inside her reticule. "I will attend as well," she said. Mr. Tresham looked at her. She lifted one hand before he spoke. "Do not. I understand the risks. I am no longer confused about which people create them," Aunt Mercer said. "I will attend, since apparently youth must be supervised while society misbehaves." Mrs. Valacourt sat back down. "I will attend if carried. A herald has been longing for meaningful exercise." For a moment, absurdly, I wanted to laugh. Instead, I went to the desk and removed Underhill's threat from where Mr. Tresham had placed it after finally returning it. I copied the wording exactly into my ledger. "If the widow proceeds tonight, the first story will not be about the card rooms. It will be about Larkspur." Then, beneath it, I wrote a threat received prior to charity reading, intended to redirect attention from account evidence to private correspondence implication. I sanded the line. Mr. Tresham watched me write it. "What are you doing?" he asked, making shame into evidence. His eyes closed briefly. When they opened, he looked older, or perhaps merely less protected by his own correctness. "I was wrong to take the note from you, and wrong to use your name, and wrong to say allow," Aunt Mercer muttered. "At least the man keeps count." He ignored her. I did not give him comfort. He had not asked for it, and I would not cheapen either of us by offering it too soon. He said, "So I still think tonight may injure you." "It may. And still you go. Because the room matters more. Because the room cannot defend itself without standing somewhere visible." He nodded once, and something in that small movement conceded more than argument could. But concession was not repair. Not yet. At dusk, the library closed its public door and prepared to enter the room that had judged it without invitation. Miss Pike remained behind with Bet and Clara, all three under Mrs. Valacourt's arrangement and Harold's secondary cousin at the west entrance. Mrs. Lyle had been sent word to avoid the crescent entirely. The late admission bell stayed active, not loudly, not defiantly, simply active. Mr. Tresham saw it when I checked the cord. He said nothing. Good. The charity reading was held in the assembly room 2 doors beyond the committee office. By the time we arrived, the crescent had dressed itself in candles, flowers, polished chairs, and all the little hypocrisies by which society convinces itself beauty proves virtue. A table near the front held the donated books. My parcel sat there already, untouched. I let out a breath I had not known I was holding. Then I saw Underhill. He stood near the card-room doors, speaking with another young man whose smile disappeared the moment he saw Mr. Tresham. A dark green ribbon sat not at his watch chain tonight, but folded like a joke in his buttonhole. He looked at me, then at Mr. Tresham, then smiled, not triumphantly, expectantly. The room had not yet opened its books. The first story had not yet been chosen. Chapter 4, The Reading Room Defended. Underhill smiled as if the evening belonged to him. That was the first mistake men like him often make. They mistake silence for possession because silence has served them before. They mistake candles for cover, music for permission, and women's stillness for fear neatly folded. The assembly room was full enough to make retreat visible and empty enough to make every stair useful. A row of chairs had been arranged before a small reading dais, where 3 local gentlemen and 1 clergyman's wife would later recite improving passages for the benefit of a charitable subscription. The phrase itself had a clean smell: charity, improvement, subscription. A person could almost forget there were betting slips, green ribbons, second ledgers, planted sermon books, and threatened women tucked beneath the Polish. Almost. My donated books sat on the table near the front, tied no longer in brown paper but arranged among other respectable voluminous sermons, moral essays, a travel account, 2 works on household economy, and the dullest book on female education ever printed by a man who believed young ladies were improved by boredom. Inside mine lay the slips, dates, prior warnings, unanswered letters, room charges, safety concerns. Nothing dramatic, nothing a nervous matron could dismiss as female theatrics without first admitting she had read them. Mr. Tresham stood 3 paces to my right, not beside me, not away from me either. The distance was exact enough to hurt. Miss Tresham entered with Aunt Mercer and did not look at the floor. That alone was a declaration. Several women noticed. One older gentleman noticed too and leaned toward his wife. She did not lean back. Good. A wife who refuses a whisper can ruin a man's whole evening. Mrs. Valacourt arrived last, borne in by Harold and moral inevitability. She looked around the room once and said, loudly enough to frighten a vase, "Too many candles. People always overlight rooms where they expect poor conduct." Aunt Mercer replied, "They hope glare will pass for virtue." 2 ladies nearby pretended not to hear and heard every word. I moved to the charity table. A steward I recognized from the Crescent office stood near it, arranging pamphlets with the strained expression of a man who had been told too much and trusted with too little. He looked at my hand as I touched the top volume. "Mrs. Fenwick," he said, "I believe the books have already been placed." "I am not moving them." "No, of course. Only," Mr. Pike said. He stopped. People who stop at the wrong point are often more useful than those who continue elegantly. I turned to him. "What did Mr. Pike say?" The steward swallowed. "Only that the Fenwick books might be better held aside until the committee matter is settled." "And did Mr. Pike give that instruction before or after he was suspended from record access?" His face emptied. That was answer enough. Behind me, Mr. Tresham's voice came calmly. Mr. Pike has no authority over the charity table tonight. The steward bowed too quickly. Of course, Sir Underhill had begun watching us. Good. A man who watches cannot entirely perform innocence. His attention becomes another line in the account. I took my place near the side of the room, not hidden and not central. Mrs. Valcourt's carriage of self required 2 chairs and accepted 3. Aunt Mercer settled beside Miss Tresham with the expression of a woman prepared to bite society if it came close enough. Mr. Tresham approached me only after a group of ladies passed between us and left again, offering their eyes but not their greetings. They tried to remove the books, he said. I should have anticipated that. He accepted it without defense. A small thing. Not small. Across the room, Underhill lifted a glass in our direction. I looked away first, not because he had won the exchange, but because men like him enjoy being watched by the women they intend to frighten. Denning them an audience is the least expensive insult. Mr. Tresham said. He will move before the reading begins. Likely. With Larkspur. I kept my gaze on the charity table. If he has enough, and if he does not, he will imply the rest. A silence. Then, quietly. I am sorry it was. No argument around it. No explanation attached. No attempt to drag the apology past his other errors and make it cover more ground than one sentence could honestly hold. I looked at him then. For which part? But his mouth tightened, but he did not retreat. Taking the note. Using your name, saying aloud, trying to remove you from your own argument, believing, even briefly, that I could protect the truth by making you less visible beside it. The assembly room moved around us, skirts, cuffs, greetings, the clink of cups, the murmur of respectable boredom preparing to be entertained. Yet the space between us had gone very still. You counted them, I said. Aunt Mercer will be pleased. I live for approval. Despite myself, I nearly smiled. Nearly. He saw it and did not claim it. Good. Then the steward struck a small bell to call the room toward order. The first reader took the dais, a clergyman with a kind face and no sense of length. He began with a passage on charity improving both giver and receiver. The room settled into careful inattention. People listen to improving passages much as they attend cold baths, with the belief that endurance proves superiority. I watched the charity table. The books waited. One gentleman drifted toward them during the second reading. Not Underhill. A friend of his, perhaps. Brown hair, pale waistcoat. The smile of someone over-accustomed to not being corrected. He lifted the household economy volume and opened it. His smile faded. He read the slip. Then he closed the book too, quickly, and looked toward Underhill. There. The first small crack. A lady beside him noticed the motion and naturally picked up the same book after he moved away. She read. Her brows drew together. She slipped the paper half out, read the line beneath, and then did what society does when it finds something sharper than gossip in its hand. She showed another woman. By the third reading, 5 books had been open. By the fourth, no one was listening to the dais. The clergyman's wife continued bravely through a passage on modest conduct, while 3 matrons discovered that modest conduct had been used to ignore written safety complaints for months. A retired colonel opened the travel account, frowned at the slip, turned it over as if the reverse might apologize, and then took it to the nearest trustee. Mr. Tresham did not move. I did not move either. Underhill did. He crossed toward the charity table with a laugh prepared before he reached it. That was unwise. Prepared laughter rarely survives contact with paper. Good heavens, he said, taking up the household economy volume. What is this? Has the library begun lending accusations with sermons? Several heads turned. There it was. The first attempt to frame. Mr. Tresham stepped forward. I caught his sleeve. Only for a moment. Not to stop him entirely, to remind him. He looked down at my hand. This time, neither of us recoiled. I released him. He stepped back. Underhill saw the exchange and smiled wider. Mrs. Fenwick, he said, raising his voice just enough. Surely this is not your idea of charity. I walked to the table. Each step felt longer than it was. I said, it is my idea of record-keeping. A few people shifted. Underhill held up one slip. These notes appear to suggest some grievance against the Crescent management. The record dated warnings previously sent to the trustee office. How industrious. How delayed, Mrs. Valcourt said from her chair. Several people looked over. She stared back until they wished they had not. Underhill laughed lightly. I fear this is precisely the difficulty. A charitable evening has been turned into a platform for personal complaint. And no, I said. A complaint against the library was made personal to every woman using it. These slips restore the matter to the building where it began. His eyes sharpened. There. Restore, he said. Such a confident word from a woman whose own correspondence may not bear public restoration. Not the room change. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. Mr. Tresham moved again. This time I did not stop him. Underhill looked toward him. You understand me, Tresham? No, Mr. Tresham said. I understand why you need to alter the subject. A murmur ran through the room. Underhill's color rose slightly. Do I? You brought a planted sermon volume to Mrs. Fenwick's library this morning. Someone gasped. Foolish, perhaps, but useful. Underhill's smile vanished and returned in poorer condition. A book found near a passage door. By an unnamed servant, according to you. containing a betting slip from the crescent card room. The colonel holding the travel book lowered it slowly. Underhill said, "You are making a strange accusation. I am making a sequence." That word reached me more deeply than it should have. Sequence. Not noise. Not defense. Not resactness. Mr. Tresham continued, voice steady enough to force the room to follow him. Mrs. Fenwick wrote repeatedly regarding side door safety. The letters went unanswered. During the same period, private rooms were hired under incomplete or misleading entries. Rear door porterage increased. Trimble Lane repairs increased. Green token admissions were used to bypass public records. Today, Mr. Underhill delivered an object meant to implicate the library while containing evidence from the very card room under question. Underhill said, "Too quickly. This is absurd. Then you will have no objection to the committee opening the second sheets tonight." The phrase struck harder than any accusation. Pike, standing near the wall, went gray. Underhill turned toward him before he could prevent it. Half the room saw. There are moments when proof does not need to speak because guilt looks in the wrong direction. Mrs. Valacourt murmured, "Beautiful." Aunt Mercer said, "Adequate." The committee chairman, a heavy man with white brows and a face trained for solemn meals, rose from his chair. "Mr. Tresham, what second sheets?" Mr. Tresham removed the sealed packet from his coat. Underhill's expression changed. "Not fear yet. Calculation. That was when he chose Larkspur. Before this proceeds," he said, his voice carrying easily now. "Perhaps the room should understand why Mr. Tresham has become so unusually devoted to Mrs. Fenwick's defense." The assembly room held its breath with vulgar appetite. He reached into his waistcoat. My stomach turned cold, not because I feared the slips themselves, not entirely, because private words, even innocent private words, become something else when carried in an enemy's hand. Underhill unfolded a blue paper, not mine. Badly copied, but recognizable. "Madam, I resent the accuracy." The room did not understand the line. That did not matter. It understood tone. It understood privacy. It understood the shape of implication before the content. Underhill smiled. "Larkspur," he said. "A charming borrowing name, is it not? Used by our careful acting trustee in correspondence with the lady whose lease he now defends." The room turned toward me. Then toward Mr. Tresham. Then back to me. A woman can feel reputation trying to fasten itself around her throat before the first explicit accusation is made. Mr. Tresham took one step forward. I spoke first. The word cut across the room. Underhill blinked. I looked not at him, but at the committee chairman. "Yes, Mr. Tresham borrowed books from my library under a private borrowing name before he came in trustee capacity. Yes, he exchanged recommendation slips with me, as many readers do. Yes, I recognized him when he arrived to inspect the library. No, that does not erase the dates on the warnings. No, it does not alter the room charges. No, it does not explain green token emissions, unanswered safety letters, planted evidence, or why a gentleman holding a betting slip from a private card room is so anxious that everyone discuss my margins instead. A silence, not victory shock. Useful for one breath." Underhill recovered. "How admirably prepared women often are," I said. "It is the only way to survive men who mistake embarrassment for rebuttal." A sound came from Mrs. Valacourt that might have been approval or indigestion. Either served. Mr. Tresham looked at me then, and the room likely read too much into it because the room wanted to. But I saw only one thing clearly. He had thought to save me from that moment. I had saved myself. Now he had to decide whether to stand beside the fact or try again to stand in front of it. The chairman said, "Mr. Tresham, is this true?" Mr. Tresham turned from me to him. The word was calm. "And did this correspondence influence your review of Fenwick's?" Underhill laughed once. How convenient. Mr. Tresham did not look at him. "It influenced my willingness to listen before doing harm. The evidence influenced my conclusions." The chairman frowned. "That distinction may be difficult for the room. Then the room must improve." Several people stared at him. I almost did too. Underhill's smile returned badly. "So now we are all instructed." "No," Mr. Tresham said. "Now we return to the point you are avoiding." He laid the sealed packet on the charity table. "The second sheets, doth." Peake moved, not dramatically, only toward the side door. Aunt Mercer saw first. "Peake," she said. Harold, who had materialized near the door with the genius of his profession, stepped in front of it. Pike stopped. The chairman looked from Pike to the packet to Mr. Tresham. The evening at last became too ugly to be safely called misunderstanding. "Open it," Mrs. Valacourt said. The chairman looked offended. "Madam, this is a committee matter." "Wes," she said. "And your committee has been very busy not mattering. Open it." Aunt Mercer added. Now, between two old women in a room no longer properly listening to the readings, the chairman discovered urgency. The packet was opened. The first second sheet passed from hand to hand. Underhill's initials, Pike's marks, green admissions, private settlements, suppers, porterage. The false category language by which men make appetite look administrative. The next sheet made it worse. The one after that worse still. No one spoke for a full minute. Then Miss Tresham stepped forward. She had Lady Sefton's withdrawal note in her hand. I saw Mr. Tresham move as if to stop her and then force himself still. Good. Miss Tresham stood before the chairman and placed the note atop the second sheets. "My call was withdrawn this morning," she said, voice clear though her hand trembled. Not because I did anything wrong. Because my name came too near this library while men were using the adjoining rooms and then condemning the door through which women might be seen leaving safely. Underhill said, Miss Tresham, surely you do not mean to involve yourself. I was involved by men who found my reputation useful before asking my consent. That silenced him. Her voice shook more now, but did not fail. If respectable society wishes to remove my name from consideration because I stood in a library where a threatened woman might sit by a fire, then respectable society may at least be accurate about what it is punishing. For one absurd instant I wanted to cry. Instead I stood very straight. A woman has only so many defenses in a public room. Posture is one of the cheaper ones. The chairman looked at Mr. Tresham. This requires immediate private review. No, I said. The word carried. He tersably annoyed Mrs. Fenwick. No. The review may be formal. It may not be buried. These allegations against the library were allowed to travel publicly. The correction must not be conducted entirely behind a closed door. Mr. Tresham did not speak. That was when I knew he had understood the cost. If he backed the chairman, the papers might be handled safely and the library socially smothered. If he backed me, the evening would fracture beyond committee comfort. The men named would fight. The women standing near me would pay. Miss Tresham would pay. I would pay. He looked at his sister. Then at me. Then at the books on the table, carrying their quiet slips like small blue tongues of flame. The correction begins here, he said. The chairman stared. Mr. Tresham. Here, he repeated. In the room where the library was made suspect. Underhill looked at him with something very close to hatred. Careful, he said softly. So did half the room. I have been, Mr. Tresham answered. That was the error. The words settled over the candles, the books, the open sheets, the exposed card room entries, the stunned trustees, the women watching from every corner, and the man with the green ribbon no longer smiling. For the first time all evening, the room had stopped asking whether Fenwicks deserved suspicion. It had begun asking who had taught suspicion where to look. The chairman did not like being told where correction must begin. Men who have spent years letting rooms obey them rarely enjoy discovering that furniture, women, servants, ledgers, and scandal have developed other loyalties. He stood by the charity table with the second sheets in one hand and my blue warning slip in the other, looking from Mr. Tresham to Underhill to Pike as if hoping one of them would become simple enough to blame without disturbing the structure around him. No one obliged. The clergyman's wife still stood near the dais, her abandoned improving passage held open in both hands. Behind her, the clergyman himself looked as though charity had taken a vulgar turn and ought to be steered back towards safer poverty. Several matrons had clustered near the books. Two gentlemen whispered by the card-room doors until Aunt Mercer turned her head in their direction. They stopped. Mrs. Valancourt remained seated, cane in hand, queen of the inconveniently alive. The chairman cleared his throat. This is a serious matter, Mrs. Valancourt said. We noticed. He ignored her with the bravery of the doomed. It cannot be resolved in public confusion. No, Mr. Tresham said. It will be resolved by procedure. But procedure begins with acknowledging what has been placed before the room. Underhill laughed softly. A very noble phrasing for a man defending his own indiscretion. Mr. Tresham did not turn toward him. That was wise. Underhill wanted reaction. He wanted heat. He wanted the blue slips and Larkspur to displace the second sheets. As a red scarf distracts from the knife, Mr. Tresham kept his eyes on the chairman. The correspondence between myself and Mrs. Fenwick was literary and prior to my acting review. Private, Underhill repeated. Miss Tresham stepped forward before her brother could answer. Mr. Underhill, she said. If the word private offends you, perhaps begin with your own supper room accounts. A sharp intake moved through the room. Young ladies are not supposed to strike first. They are supposed to be protected, discussed, redirected, and when necessary, quietly sacrificed. Miss Tresham had apparently grown tired of the program. Underhill bowed with mock gentleness. Miss Tresham, I admire loyalty, even when misdirected. My loyalty is exactly directed toward a library that has already cost you at least one respectable connection. Her face paled, but she did not step back. Yes, Mr. Tresham hand flexed once at his side. He did not interrupt. That restraint cost him more than speech would have. I saw it. So did she? Underhill smiled. No, she said. How educational. I had thought reputation was a thing one guarded by avoiding danger. Now I see how often it is a thing men use to make women guard them. The words struck several places at once. Lady Sefton, seated near the third row, went very still. I had not known she was present until that moment. Her face closed around itself, but not before guilt or irritation close enough to pass crossed it. The chairman looked increasingly unhappy. Good unhappiness is often the first sign that comfort has begun losing jurisdiction. Mr. Tresham finally turned to his sister. Rosamond, only her warning, not correction. A question. She looked at him and answered it without words. He inclined his head once. Permission would have insulted her. Recognition did not. Then he faced the chairman again. Miss Tresham's point is material. The library complaint has already caused social harm beyond its stated scope. The withdrawn call, the attempted implication of Mrs. Fenwick through correspondence, and the planted sermon volume all show a pattern of pressure designed to discredit witnesses and redirect attention. The chairman frowned. Witnesses to what, exactly? Unrecorded use of crescent rooms, I said. This time, all eyes came to me. I had known they would. I had stood in my own library and argued for visibility. It was one thing to argue for it beside shelves and women who knew my work. It was another to feel an assembly room reclassify me under candlelight. Widow. Correspondent. Accuser. A woman may know the terms beforehand and still feel the weight when they are placed upon her. I kept my voice clear. Fenwick sent 4 written notices about side door safety, unrecorded evening traffic, and men waiting near the Trimble Lane passage. Those notices were not answered. In the same period, according to the second sheets now opened, private rooms adjoining the same passage were hired under incomplete entries. Green token admissions were used to bypass public record, and charges were settled outside the ordinary book. I looked at Underhill. Then a hollow sermon volume containing a card, room bedding slip, and green ribbon was brought into my library by the same gentleman whose initials appear in those private sheets. Underhill's smile had become thin enough to cut paper. You speak with great certainty for a woman who was not in the card rooms. No, I said. I was in the room you wished blamed. Mrs. Valacourt tapped her cane once. Better location. A laugh moved through the assembly before good manners caught it. It was not large, but it mattered. Ridicule had turned, for 1 second, away from me and toward him. Underhill felt his face hardened. This is absurd. Are we to accept that a circulating library widow, her sentimental trustee, and a handful of old ladies have uncovered some grand wickedness because a few accounts lack tidy headings? Aunt Mercer said, We are not a handful. We are a selection. Mrs. Valacourt added, And I have never been sentimental in my life. The chairman pressed one hand to his brow. Mr. Tresham said, No one has alleged grand wickedness. I looked at him sharply. He saw the look and continued without losing the thread. Grandness is unnecessary. Misuse of rooms, unrecorded admissions, threats, planted implication, ignored safety notices, and a complaint weaponized against the one space that made those movements visible are sufficient. Sufficient. The word steadied the room because it refused exaggeration. I had not known I needed to hear it until he chose it. Not grand. Sufficient. The chairman looked at the second sheets again. Mr. Pike had retreated toward a pillar, but Harold had also retreated toward the same pillar with the coincidental grace of a footman who understood geometry better than many architects. Pike's face shone with perspiration. Sir, the second sheets were merely supplemental room charges. It is common in buildings of mixed use to maintain green token admissions. I asked. Mr. Tresham said, Unrecorded rear door access. The chairman's mouth tightened. Underhill said, For convenience. Gentlemen sometimes prefer privacy. Women too, I said. Yet when women used privacy to leave safely, the complaint called the library improper. That line traveled. I watched it move from face to face, women first, then the men attached to women clever enough to speak later. Not agreement in all, but understanding. Even discomfort, when placed correctly, can be useful. Lady Sefton rose. The room shifted at once. She was not the oldest woman present, nor the highest ranking, but she had that polished authority granted to women who have made social refusal into an art and called it maternal duty. Mr. Chairman, she said, this is becoming unsuitable for mixed company. Aunt Mercer murmured, only because mixed company has arrived at the wrong conclusion. A Lady Sefton ignored her. If there are account irregularities, let the trustees review them privately. I cannot see what good is served by young ladies being made party to such matters. Miss Tresham took one step forward. Mr. Tresham looked as if every protective instinct in him rose at once and threw itself against his ribs. He did not stop her. My lady, Miss Tresham said, young ladies are already made party to such matters when their calls are withdrawn, because the truth is inconveniently near them. Lady Sefton's face tightened. My note was meant with kindness. No, Miss Tresham said. It was meant with caution. They are not the same, someone near the back whispered. This time no one hushed it quickly enough. Lady Sefton looked toward Mr. Tresham. Surely you will not permit your sister to expose herself further. At the old shape. The old appeal. A woman using male authority to confine another woman while keeping her own gloves clean. Mr. Tresham's answer came slowly. I will not use my sister's reputation as an excuse to silence the matter. Lady Sefton stared. So did I. Perhaps he had said similar things in smaller rooms. Perhaps he had believed them privately. But here, before trustees, matrons, card room men, his sister, me, and the blue evidence on the table, the sentence became action. Miss Tresham looked at him with an expression that made me look away. Not because it was embarrassing. Because it was tender. And tenderness in public rooms is more exposed than fury. The chairman said, Very well. What do you propose, Mr. Tresham? That was the pivot. I felt it before anyone named it. The room, having resisted, now wanted a man to translate the fracture into form. It would accept procedure where it would not accept outrage. It would accept a trustee where it had only endured a widow. My hands tightened once around the ledger I carried. Then Mr. Tresham did something I did not expect. He looked at me. Not briefly. not secretly, not as a man seeking permission he could deny later. He looked as if the next step belonged not to him alone, and he meant the room to see that he knew it. Mrs. Fenwick has the sequence. Underhill gave a soft, ugly laugh. Of course she does. Mr. Tresham turned his head at last. Be quiet. 2 words. No heat, no title, no politeness. Underhill went red. The room loved it. Quietly. Shamefully. Completely. Mr. Tresham looked back to me. Mrs. Fenwick. Got my name formal and placed before everyone with professional weight rather than private error. The difference struck deeper than apology. I opened my ledger. First, I said. The second sheets are to be sealed in the presence of the chairman, Mr. Tresham, and 2 independent witnesses not connected to card rooms. Mrs. Valacourt said, I am independent of everything except taste. Aunt Mercer said, I will witness. I continued. The public complaint against Fenwick's is to be suspended, not decided, pending review of the room records. Third, the library's lease remains active and no subscriber ledger is to be requested without legal warrant. Fourth, Mr. Pike is removed from all account and access duties pending inquiry. Fifth, the side door porter is protected from dismissal until his testimony is formally taken. The chairman looked as if each point cost him money. Good. 6, I said. Any statement issued tonight must name the matter as a Crescent Room access inquiry, not a library morality review. That was the one. The room understood. The chairman, so did Pike. So did Underhill. Words decide where shame sits. If the issue remained library morality, I carried it. If it became room access inquiry, the building did. Mr. Tresham said, I support all 6. The chairman looked at him with annoyance sharpened by necessity. Lady Sefton said, This is excessive. Mrs. Valacourt answered. So was your note. Aunt Mercer leaned toward Miss Tresham and whispered loudly, She dislikes receipts. Miss Tresham whispered back, I am beginning to admire them. The chairman exhaled. The trustees will need to confer. Here, Mr. Tresham said. Possible. Then in the committee office with the door open and witnesses present. The chairman looked scandalized. Trustee deliberations are private, so were the second sheets, Mr. Tresham said. Privacy has lost some credibility tonight. At that traveled too. A few gentlemen objected. Not Ledley. They had not yet decided which direction safety lay and therefore used only moderate indignation. The chairman conferred with 2 trustees near the side wall. Pike was made to sit. Harold stood behind him with the air of a man admiring wallpaper. Underhill remained near the card room doors, too proud to leave and too exposed to smile. The clergyman's wife asked, faintly, whether the reading would continue. No one answered her. During the confusion, Mr. Tresham came to stand beside me, not in front, beside. This time the distance was not exact enough to hurt. It was exact enough to be seen. You have given them away to preserve face, he said quietly. I have given them away to preserve the library. On the building. If it deserves preserving after this. His mouth moved almost into a smile. A severe distinction. I am in a severe mood. I had noticed. The words might have become light on another evening. They did not. The air between us held too much larkspur. The note, his errors, my anger, the way his voice had changed around apology, the way he had placed my sequence before the room. He said lower. You were right. About visibility. I know. He accepted that with a short breath that might, in another setting, have been amusement. I also know, I added, that you were not wholly wrong about danger. His gaze shifted to me, a small concession. I could feel its value by how much it cost to say. Not wholly, he said. Do not grow fond of the phrase. I would not dare. For 1 second, despite the room, despite Underhill, despite every eye that might choose to turn us into implication. I felt the line between us reopen not as softness, not as romance performed under candles, but as work resumed after rupture. Trust did not return whole. It did not need to. It had a place to stand. Then Pike stood too quickly. Harold caught him by the shoulder before he made 2 steps. Papers fell from Pike's coat. Not many. 3 slips. 1 green token. 1 list of initials. 1 folded note in Underhill's hand. The room went silent so fast the candle flames seemed loud. Mr. Tresham picked up the folded note. This time he did not pocket it. He opened it, read, and handed it first to the chairman, then to me. It said if Fenwick's is not discredited before the vote, the side accounts become useless. Press the impropriety. Use the widow if necessary. No signature. But the hand was the same as Underhill's note, and everyone who mattered had now watched it fall from Pike's coat. Underhill moved toward the door. Aunt Mercer said Harold, still holding Pike, looked pained. Only got 2 hands, Mom. Mr. Tresham crossed the room in 3 strides and reached the card room door before Underhill did. No scene, no blow, only his body between the man and escape. You will remain. Underhill's face had gone white with rage. You have no authority to detain me, new, Mr. Tresham said. But if you leave now, everyone in this room will decide why. Underhill stopped. That was the useful thing about society. It could be turned if one caught it by its own vanity. The chairman read the note once more, then again. At last, very slowly, he said, the complaint against Fenwick's is suspended pending immediate review. Mrs. Valacourt said, try again. She looked back. Aunt Mercer said, say the rest. The chairman seemed to age by 5 years. The library lease remains active. Mr. Pike is suspended from duties. The second sheets will be sealed. A room access inquiry will begin tonight. I closed my eyes for one breath. Only one. When I opened them, Miss Tresham was looking at me with fierce, wet eyes. Miss Pike stood in the assembly doorway, though had not seen her enter, one hand pressed to her mouth. Behind her, Bet and Clara peered from the corridor. Somehow the room had grown wider. Not safer. Wider, Underhill said. This will not hold. Mr. Tresham replied. Then you may test it formally. Oh, Underhill's eyes flicked to me. And will the widow test her correspondence formally too? The room braced. But this time the words did not strike the same way. Because the note on the table had named the tactic. Use the widow if necessary. Once cruelty is made visible as method, it loses some of its perfume. I looked at him and said, gladly, if required. I keep better records than you. Aunt Mercer laughed. Mrs. Valacourt smiled. Miss Tresham actually clapped one hand over her mouth to hide what might have been a laugh or a sob. Mr. Tresham turned just in that I saw the edge of his expression. Pride, not possession, not rescue, pride. Dangerous man. The chairman ordered the papers sealed. The public reading never resumed. Instead, the assembly room became something far more useful, a place where people spoke in low, urgent voices and began rearranging what they believed they had seen. That would not end the matter. Not tonight. Underhill had family, money, and the talent of looking wronged when cornered. Pike had papers not yet found. The committee would try to shrink the scandal if it could. Lady Sefton would recast Prudence's foresight by morning. But Fenwick's was not closed. The complaint was no longer master of the story, and the room had heard the phrase that mattered. Use the widow if necessary. Later, when the sealed packet was taken into Mr. Tresham's custody and Mrs. Valacourt had announced herself exhausted in a tone suggesting everyone else had caused it through incompetence, I gathered the books from the charity table. Several slips were missing. Taken, perhaps, passed hand to hand, hidden in reticules, carried into drawing rooms where they would become less dull with every retelling. I should have been alarmed. I was not. Let them travel. Mr. Tresham came to stand beside me and picked up the volume on female education. He swung. Is truly terrible. It has served nobly. We should retire it with honors. Waki. He looked at me then. Wes, he said, if you permit the pronoun. The question was quiet enough that no one else heard. A small repair. Offered, not assumed. I took the book from his hand and placed it atop the stack. For the work, I said. For the work. He agreed it was not everything. It was not yet enough. But after a room built on suspicion had begun to speak in records, enough was no longer the correct measure. Forward was. The sealed packet did not leave the assembly room quietly. Nothing does, once people have watched it become important. The chairman carried it first, because dignity required him to appear in charge of the thing that had escaped his control. Mr. Tresham walked beside him. I followed with my ledger. Mrs. Valacourt's cane sounded behind me like punctuation, and Aunt Mercer brought Miss Tresham with the firm grip of a woman escorting both a young lady and a principal. Pike came under Harold's supervision, which was not an official condition and therefore all the more effective. Underhill came last, not guarded, not detained, but watched by enough eyes that flight would have become confession. The committee office was too small for truth. That was my first thought when we entered it. Truth, once crowded into a room designed for ledgers and male convenience, has a way of making all furniture look guilty. The 2 chairs were insufficient. The desk was insufficient. The locked cabinet stood open, one drawer still gaping from our earlier search like a mouth that had said too much. Candles were brought. More papers were placed on the desk. The door remained open. That mattered. More than one lady lingered in the passage under the pretense of adjusting gloves, waiting for a maid, or recovering from the heat of the assembly room. Several gentlemen attempted to look uninterested from angles carefully chosen to hear. Miss Pike stood just beyond the threshold with Bet and Clara. I would have sent them back to the library had I believed ignorance could protect them. I no longer did. The chairman looked at the open door. This is highly irregular. Mrs. Valacourt sat down without invitation. So far, regularity has performed badly. Aunt Mercer remained standing near the door. Continue. The chairman turned to Mr. Tresham, as if hoping for male rescue from elderly pressure. Mr. Tresham said, the door stays open. But the chairman's mouth flattened. Good. Every public correction begins by denying someone the comfort of a closed door. The second sheets were laid out in date order. Pike's marks appeared in the corners. Underhill's initials appeared where they had no innocent reason to appear. Green token admissions clustered around evenings when my warnings had gone unanswered and when the complaint against the library had grown more specific. Charges for candles, wine, rear door porterage, and private cleaning told a story that no sermon could improve. Mr. Tresham read each line aloud, not dramatically, not loudly. That was what made it work. February 12th, private supper room, entry by rear token, initials EU, and LF 6 bottles claret, 2 bottles brandy, rear porterage paid cash. The chairman winced at the quantity, not the conduct. Men revealed themselves in the order of their discomfort. February 13th, Mr. Tresham continued. Mrs. Fenwick's first letter regarding men waiting near Trimble Lane, received by office. No reply recorded. He turned another page. March 4th. Music chamber hired under initials CS. Charitable meeting noted in public book. Second sheet records card, room settlement, and private supper charge. He turned the public sheet toward the chairman, then the second sheet. March 5th. Mrs. Fenwick's sicken letter. No. Pike cleared his throat. The office receives many informal notes, I said. Mine were formal enough to be ignored 4 times. Aunt Mercer murmured, clear hand, clear complaint. I saw the copies. A Pike looked toward the door, perhaps measuring whether a smaller man might still slip past Harold's shoulder and choose a new life elsewhere. Harold did not move. Mr. Tresham Wraith, Trimble Lane lock repaired. Cash paid. Same night, green token admissions to supper room. Initials EU, LF, and HEM. The chairman looked up. He, Mrs. Valcourt said, Henry Merriweather. A murmur ran through the passage. The chairman's face flushed. Madam, speculation is what you allowed against the library, she said. I am offering memory. Mr. Tresham checked the next sheet. Henry Merriweather's name appears in full on the corresponding wine merchant's delivery note. The passage murmured again, louder this time. One gentleman outside moved away rather quickly. Perhaps to warn someone, perhaps to be ill. Both seemed possible. Underhill's posture had altered. He no longer smiled. He stood with one hand at the back of the second chair, fingers resting too lightly on the wood, as if he wished to appear relaxed but feared leaving marks. This proves only that gentlemen use private rooms privately, he said. No, I said. It proves that when women complained of danger in shared passages, the complaints were suppressed by the same office that recorded private mail access through those passages. He looked at me. You have practiced that sentence. I have lived near enough to its consequence. His gaze flicked to Mr. Tresham. And your defender approves. Before Mr. Tresham could answer, I said, You are trying again. Underhill's eyes narrowed. I stepped closer to the table. You cannot answer the dates, so you point at correspondence. You cannot answer the green tokens, so you imply impropriety. You cannot answer Pike's note telling you to use the widow if necessary. So you use the widow again. The room outside the door grew still. Not silent still. It is a different thing, stillness after recognition. Silence may belong to confusion. Stillness belongs to people who have begun to see the mechanism. Underhill's mouth curled. You give yourself consequence. No, I said. You did. I am merely entering it accurately. Mr. Tresham's hand rested near the sealed packet, not touching. Ready. The chairman said, Mr. Underhill, perhaps you would address the note found in Mr. Pike's possession. Underhill laughed once. Signed. In your hand, Mr. Tresham said. Thin a resemblance. Then write the sentence again. Underhill stopped. So did everyone else. Aunt Mercer gave a soft sound of approval. At last. Something practical. Mr. Tresham took a blank sheet from the desk and placed it before Underhill. Then he dipped the pen and held it out. Write use the widow if necessary. Underhill did not take the pen. The refusal was answer enough, but not yet formal enough. The chairman said, Mr. Underhill. Underhill's face hardened. I will not submit to a schoolboy trial because a library woman has stirred hysteria among bored old women and frightened clerks. Mrs. Valcourt rose. The room should not have allowed her to appear large. She was old, thin, and leaning on a cane it did. Young man, she said, I have survived 2 husbands, 3 miscarriages, a bankruptcy, gout in the household, 4 prime ministers, and a niece who married a poet. Do not flatter yourself that you are capable of stirring me into hysteria. Miss Tresham made a sound behind her hand. Aunt Mercer said, Well delivered. Mrs. Valcourt did not sit. I also own the lease on the East Corner shops, she continued. And I have known Mr. Mallow's mother since she washed linen for my sister. If the porter is dismissed for truth, he comes under my roof by morning. If Mrs. Fenwick's library is closed because your friends dislike witnesses, I will fund its relocation and ensure every matron in Bath knows why it moved. The chairman stared at her. So did I. Mrs. Valcourt turned her head slightly toward me. Do not look grateful. It gives me indigestion. I looked down immediately. Mr. Tresham said, Madam, that is generous. It is strategic. Generosity is what people call strategy when women do it with money. Underhill had gone pale with anger now. That explains the evening perfectly, he said. A widow, a spinster brigade, and a trustee sentimental enough to be led by both, Mr. Tresham said. Enough. No, Underhill turned on him. Not enough. You stand here as if this is principle. But everyone has seen you look at her. Everyone has heard the name. Larkspur, he spat it softly, almost with pleasure of its lips. Private hours. Private defense. You are not defending a library. You are defending your own attachment and calling it evidence. Fully it was. Fully named. The thing he had circled and threatened and carried like a knife under a glove. The room did what rooms do. It turned toward the woman first. Toward me, I had expected it. Expectation did not make it painless. My hand tightened around my ledger until the leather edge pressed into my palm. A dozen answers rose in me, all accurate, none safe. Denny too much and I made private reading look shameful. Admit too much and the evidence became romance to those eager to dismiss it. Stand silent and let Underhill frame me into the very softness he needed. Then Mr. Tresham moved, not in front of me, beside me, this time close enough that no one could mistake the choice and far enough not to claim ownership of it. Yes, he said. The room seemed to stop. Underhill stared. So did I. Mr. Tresham kept his gaze on the chairman, not on me, not on Underhill, not on the passage full of listeners. Yes, he repeated. I corresponded with Mrs. Fenwick through recommendation slips before I knew her name. Yes, I admired her mind before I entered her library as acting trustee. Yes, that prior regard caused me to listen longer than I otherwise might have done when I arrived with the committee's complaint. A murmur began. He can thank God for it. No one spoke. Even Mrs. Valancourt looked briefly satisfied beyond speech. Mr. Tresham continued, had I not listened, I would have closed the one room whose records had already preserved what this office suppressed. I would have mistaken female movement for moral danger while male misconduct used the adjoining passages. I would have made the neat error that men here were relying upon me to make. His voice stayed level. That made every word carry. My association with Mrs. Fenwick does not explain the second sheets. It does not explain Pike's marks. It does not explain green token admissions, the ignored safety letters, the planted sermon volume, the betting slip, the threat pushed under her door, or the note found in Pike's coat. It explains only why one man paused before doing what a lazy committee expected him to do quickly. The chairman looked as if he wished to object and could not find the morally stable ground from which to do so. A pretty speech. No, Mr. Tresham said. A public statement recorded. The chairman blinked. Wes. Record that I disclosed the prior literary correspondence, stated its nature, and placed it outside the evidentiary sequence. Record also that Mr. Underhill raised the matter only after the second sheets were opened. Mr. Tresham turned then to Pike. Write it. Pike stared at him. Harold shifted behind him. Pike sat down and took up the pen with a trembling hand. That sound, the scratch of ink beginning to trap what men had hoped to leave as insinuation, was more satisfying than applause could ever be. I could not look at Mr. Tresham, so I looked at the papers. Safe things, cruel things, but safe when arranged correctly. Pike wrote. The chairman corrected the phrasing twice. Aunt Mercer corrected the chairman once, and was right. Mrs. Valancourt demanded literary correspondence remain in the line because any phrase more suggestive would invite idiots. Mr. Tresham agreed. Underhill tried to object to being named as having introduced the matter. The entire doorway remembered that he had. It stayed. The room changed after that. Not kindly. Kindness would have been too much to ask and too soft to use. But the direction of suspicion shifted. The more Underhill tried to return the conversation to me, the more visible the tactic became. The more Pike hedged, the more the second sheet spoke. The more the chairman attempted to defer, the more the open doorway made deferral look like burial. At last Mr. Mallow was brought in. He looked terrified. He also looked determined not to lose the only respectable people who had promised his wages might survive honesty. Mr. Tresham did not question him first. He glanced at me. Misstepped Mallow, I said. You will answer only what you know directly. No guesses. No names unless you saw faces or were given names. If you are unsure, say unsure. If you were told, say by whom. If you were paid, say by whom. Mallow nodded. The chairman looked displeased at my conducting the opening. Mr. Tresham looked at the chairman until he became less displeased, or at least less public about it. Mallow spoke. Grallo tokens. Shown at the side door. Pike's instruction. Underhill's visits. Unrecorded admissions. Women brought through at least twice in tears or drink. Money passed outside the public book. The messenger called green. The black heart. The second sheets behind the music cupboard. Each sentence made the room smaller around Underhill and Pike and larger around the truth. When Mallow faltered at the mention of women brought through, Miss Pike made a soft sound in the passage. Not fear this time. Recognition. The ugly kind. Miss Tresham went to her. No one stopped her. Mallow finished with his cap twisted nearly out of shape. The chairman said, this will require formal affidavits. Wes, Mr. Tresham said. Discretion will be necessary? No, I said. Everyone looked at me again. I had grown used to it by then. Not comfortable. Used. Protection will be necessary, I said. Discretion is too often the word used when the powerful ask the vulnerable to remain quiet so the paperwork looks clean. The chairman's nostrils flared. Mr. Tresham said, Mrs. Fenwick is correct. I do not know which annoyed the chairman more, the sentence or the fact that it had become increasingly unsurprising. The final arrangement took nearly an hour. Pike was removed from office duties pending sworn statement. Mallow was placed under temporary protection and employment through Mr. Tresham's household until the inquiry concluded. The second sheets were sealed in duplicate, one copy under the chairman, one under Mr. Tresham, with Mrs. Valancourt and Aunt Mercer as witnesses. The complaint against Fenwick's was not merely suspended now, but formally reclassified as materially connected to the room access inquiry. The library lease remained active. No subscriber ledger would be demanded. Most important, a notice would be posted by morning. Not long. Not dramatic. Not enough to expose the women who used my room, but enough. The Crescent trustees acknowledge prior written safety notices from circulating library concerning side passage access. Review of adjoining room use is underway. No finding of impropriety has been made against Fenwick's. I read the wording 3 times. No finding of impropriety. A dry phrase, a plain one. A shield if shields were made of committee reluctance and old women's signatures. It would not silence every mouth. Nothing does. But it would prevent the complaint from standing alone in public as fact, which is often half the victory women are told not to ask for. When the notice was agreed, Underhill at last made to leave. No one stopped him this time. He paused at the door and looked back at Mr. Tresham. "This is not over," Mr. Tresham replied. "No, it is recorded." Underhill's gaze shifted to me. I expected a final insult. Perhaps he did too. Instead, he saw the room watching him watch me and chose silence. He left. Pike sat down heavily. Mrs. Valancourt said, "A satisfying exit would have involved falling, but one must accept the materials provided." Aunt Mercer looked toward the chairman. "Have we finished pretending this was a charity reading?" The chairman rubbed his forehead. For tonight, she agreed. The words moved through me strangely. For tonight, the library remained. For tonight, Miss Pike would not be locked out by caution or gossip. For tonight, Miss Tresham's lost call had become not shame but evidence of pressure. For tonight, Larkspur had not destroyed me. For tonight, Mr. Tresham had not hidden me behind correctness. It was not peace. It was not victory entire. It was enough to walk home by. The assembly room had thinned when we returned to gather the books. The readings had never resumed, and the clergyman's wife looked faintly resentful of all unplanned morality. Several ladies avoided my eye. Several others did not. Lady Sufton passed Miss Tresham without speaking, then paused, turned back, and inclined her head by the smallest possible degree. Not apology, not restoration, but a sign that the direction of contempt had become less certain. Miss Tresham watched her go. "A great triumph," she said. "I have been nodded at by a woman who withdrew her son." Mrs. Valancourt said, "Take what currency is offered and spend it cruelly." Miss Tresham smiled, tiredly. I collected my books from the charity table. Some slips were gone. Some had been returned inside the wrong covers. One had been annotated in an unknown female hand. I saw the man near the west stairs in March. No name, no signature. But more would come. That is how rooms begin speaking once the first lock gives way. Mr. Tresham stood beside me while I stacked the volumes. Mrs. Fenwick. I looked down at the books. Mr. Tresham. I meant what I said. You said many things. The public statement. I placed the sermon volume atop the household economy book. Yes, and the private truth beneath it. My hands stilled. Around us, chairs scraped. Voices withdrew. Wax cooled in shallow pools. The room, exhausted by scandal, had begun pretending it had always been on the side of proper inquiry. I said, "This is not the room for that, nor the hour. Nor are we prepared enough to speak of private truths as if public courage settles them." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "No." That was why I finally looked at him, because he had not argued. His face showed fatigue, regret, and something steadier than either. Not triumph, not claim. The man who had come with punctual authority to close my library now stood beside a table of misused charity books and seemed to understand, at last, that public defense did not purchase private forgiveness. "I will walk back separately," I said. His jaw tightened, then east. "But send Harold by the west side first. Miss Pike may need the rear entrance check before she leaves." I already did. Of course he had. I hated that I liked him for it. "Good," I said. He bowed. Formal enough for the room and not quite enough for the truth between us. "Good night, Mrs. Fenwick." "Good night, Mr. Tresham." I left with Mrs. Valancourt, Aunt Mercer, Miss Tresham, and the books. Behind us, the assembly room continued rearranging itself around the record we had forced into it. Ahead of us, Fenwick's waited with its bell, its shelves, its west passage, its blue slips, its frightened women, its stubborn old allies, and its doors still open. Not safe. Open. For that night, it was enough. The notice was posted before 9 the next morning. Not on the far side of the crescent, where inconvenient truths go to be technically available and practically invisible. Not inside the committee office, where men might stand before it and admire their own restraint. It was fixed beside the main entrance under glass, with the trustee's seal at the bottom and Mrs. Valancourt's signature as witness in a hand so sharp it looked capable of drawing blood. I stood across the street and read it 3 times. "No finding of impropriety has been made against Fenwick's." The sentence was not beautiful. It did not sing. It did not restore the women who had turned back from my door, or return Miss Tresham's call, or make Mrs. Lyle's mouth unbruised, or erase the word Larkspur from the minds of people who enjoyed carrying private things improperly. But it stood, in public, where the complaint had traveled. Correction now waited to be seen. Beside me, Mrs. Valancourt leaned on her cane and said, "The wording is dry enough to choke a bishop. I approve." Aunt Mercer, who had come despite claiming the weather insulted her bones, said, "It should have named more men." "It will," Mrs. Valancourt replied. "Men are so impatient. Give documents time." Behind us, Miss Tresham stood with her hands folded around her reticule. She had dressed carefully, not brightly enough to appear defiant, not plainly enough to appear ashamed. A morning gown of soft blue, a bonnet tied evenly, gloves buttoned without haste. Society reads women in details. Miss Tresham had written herself clearly. Mr. Tresham stood on the other side of the street near the entrance, speaking with the chairman and Mr. Hale. The solicitor called in to formalize what the assembly room had begun. He had not crossed to us yet. I was grateful, not because I did not wish to see him, because I did, and wanting something too soon after injury is an unruly fact best kept under observation. Fenwick's opened at the ordinary hour. For 10 minutes, no one came. Then Mrs. Valancourt entered, though she had been standing with me outside and could hardly be counted as a test of public opinion. Aunt Mercer followed because she had decided the chair nearest the atlas shelf was better for watching weak character in motion. Miss Tresham entered third. That mattered. It mattered more because she paused at the door, made sure 2 women walking past could see her, and said in a perfectly clear voice, "Mrs. Fenwick, I have come for the book you recommended." I had recommended no book. I understood at once. "So you have," I said. "You will find it ready." She smiled. It trembled only slightly. The 2 women on the pavement slowed. One looked at the notice. The other looked at Miss Tresham through the open door. Neither entered, but they did not hurry away. That in Bath was almost a fanfare. By 10:30, Miss Bell returned the travel memoir she had borrowed 2 days earlier. "I am not withdrawing," she said before I could greet her. I had not asked. "No, but my aunt did. Twice." "And what did you answer?" "That I had already paid the quarter and dislike waste." A powerful moral position. I thought so. She glanced toward Miss Tresham, then lowered her voice. "Is it true about the room accounts?" "It is true that an inquiry is underway." How wonderfully unsatisfying curacy often is. She smiled at that and took 2 novels, one practical travel account, and after a moment of silent rebellion, the dull volume on female education that had served so nobly the night before. "I feel it deserves better company," she said. "It has earned retirement but not peace." "None of us have," she answered and left with her head high. After that, the room did not fill, not at once. It repaired itself by inches. One maid came to ask whether her mistress's subscription could be paused, without ending. A companion left a note asking if the late return arrangement remained available. Bet and Clara appeared near noon with a packet of copywork and a story of 3 women at the dressmaker speaking of green ribbons in voices they believed discreet. Miss Pike arrived before luncheon with her copybooks and a face too pale but no longer folded inward. I paid her for the first duplicate record sheet from the trustee commission. She looked at the coins in her palm as if they might vanish. "This is too much," she whispered. "No," I said. "It is itemized." That steadied her more than comfort would have done. Mr. Tresham came in just after 1. The front bell rang, and every person in the room looked up. That would continue for some time, I suspected. A bell remembers fear even after the hand that caused it is gone. He stopped just inside the door, a visible pause. Not uncertainty, courtesy to the room itself. Then he removed his hat. "Mrs. Fenwick, Mr. Tresham." The address was formal, necessary, but the words had acquired so much history that even formality seemed to carry weight. He approached the desk and placed 3 documents before me. 1 copy of the amended lease protection draft. 1 copy of the temporary access order. 1 signed authorization for Fenwick's to maintain late admission under category record, no names, pending permanent revision. I did not touch them immediately. That was quick. The chairman wished the unpleasantness finished. "And you?" I wished the useful part secured before he discovered a more comfortable conscience. That was well said. I refused to show how much I approved. I opened the top sheet. The language remained legal, cautious, and committee-shaped, but beneath it I could see the necessary bones. No subscriber ledger without warrant, late admission recognized as controlled private access, not public gathering, West Passage safety measures required, rear door porter accountable to revised oversight, crescent room bookings to be entered in one public ledger with no supplementary private sheets. No hidden second book. No green token wrote without exposure. No easy way to call women's movement improper while men's movement remained administrative. I read the final clause twice. Fenwick's circulating library retains operational discretion over reading room admissions within stated safety provisions. Operational discretion. I almost touched the words. Instead I said, "This is a better document than I expected. I had assistance." From Mr. Hale. "Yes." And Mrs. Valancourt. From the hearth Mrs. Valancourt said, "He means I threatened to purchase the building and appoint him clerk of draughts if the wording became foolish." Mr. Tresham inclined his head. As assistance, the room unexpectedly laughed, not loudly, not freely, but enough. Laughter after danger is not always joy. Sometimes it is the body discovering it has not been dismissed from life. Miss Tresham came to the desk. Anne Pike. Removed from office duties pending sworn statement and committee action. No. Mr. Tresham's face changed. "Not Runo," I said. "Men with money seldom are on first evidence." His gaze came to me. "But named. Formally. He cannot walk through the crescent as if nothing has happened. Is not enough." No, I said. "But it is more than yesterday." He accepted that. Miss Tresham looked down at the documents, then toward the shelves. "Lady Sefton sent a note this morning." Mr. Tresham stiffened. "Rosamond, she regrets haste," Miss Tresham said. "She hopes no permanent awkwardness need remain." Aunt Mercer barked a laugh from the atlas shelf. "The anthem of people who have been caught being practical cowards." Miss Tresham's mouth curved. "Governor," her brother said. She looked at him with some surprise. He noticed. "You expected me to urge repair." I expected you to consider. I did. Bah, he paused. Then I considered you. That silenced her. Her eyes filled. This time she turned away before the tears could be counted by anyone who had not earned them. Mrs. Valancourt said, very loudly, there is dust on this atlas. There was not. Everyone pretended to accept the subject. By late afternoon, the library felt almost itself again. Almost. A room does not pass through public suspicion and return unchanged. Nor should it. To pretend restoration is often to invite the old harm back under a polished name. So we altered what needed altering and kept what must not be surrendered. Harold fixed the new bell pull in the repair room, muttering the whole time that the wall had been constructed by criminals. Bet and Clara labeled the late entry cards by category only. Miss Pike copied the temporary access order twice, her hand gaining steadiness line by line. Mrs. Valancourt dozed in her chair and denied it when accused by Aunt Mercer. Miss Tresham selected 3 books and placed them in plain view, as if daring anyone to decide whether her reputation had been improved or endangered by literacy. Mr. Tresham remained near the side table, sorting the duplicate room access papers with me. Not too close, not performatively distant. A new measure, still being learned. At one point he handed me a blue slip that had fallen from the returned travel book. My old hand. His old answer. Madame, I resent the accuracy. I looked at it for a long moment. You should not keep these loose, he said. No, they have already been stolen once in spirit, if not in fact. Do you recommend burning them? He did not answer quickly. No, he said at last. I recommend deciding what they are before someone else does. That was inconveniently wise. I took the slip, folded it, and placed it inside the back of the post-road book. Then I opened the subscriber ledger to his entry. The name there still read Larkspur. I dipped my pen. Do you wish it amended? He came to stand near enough to read over my shoulder. To what? Paul Gabriel Tresham. Full name. No alias, no flower, no private hiding in public accounts. I wrote it. The ink took a moment to settle. There, I said. He looked at the line as if it mattered more than a subscription entry ought. And the slips, he asked. They remain with the books. A's correspondence. A's reading history, his mouth moved. A severe classification. Say for now. For now. That answer did not disappoint him. Or if it did, he had learned not to make disappointment into pressure. The day thinned toward evening. Usually, that was when the library changed. Daylight subscribers out. Late needs measured. The room adjusting itself for women who arrived not always for books but never only for charity. Tonight the late bell remained active. The west passage was watched. The new side pull worked. The doors stayed under my discretion. That was the victory. Not that men had behaved badly and been found out. Men often do that and call it history. The victory was that the remedy had not required making the room less itself. At 7, Mrs. Lyle arrived by the west passage. She wore Miss Tresham's plain shawl. Her bruise had darkened and yellowed at the edge, but she stood straighter. In one hand, she carried the hollow sermon book. In the other, a small wrapped parcel. I have come to return this, she said. You may keep it longer. No, I would rather borrow something that is truly a book. The room heard that and understood enough not to stare. I found her a volume of travel letters by a woman who had no patience for bad roads or foolish men. Mrs. Lyle held it carefully against her chest. Will it be safe to come now? She asked. No one answered too quickly. Then I said, Sappher. She nodded. That was the honest word. It did not insult her with false guarantees. Mr. Tresham stood near the west shelves, visible but not hovering. Mrs. Lyle saw him. Her face tightened. He bowed. Mrs. Lyle. She hesitated, then inclined her head. No gratitude required. No explanation. Good. When she had gone into the back room, Mr. Tresham said quietly, I would have closed this. I need to hear that occasionally. I can arrange regular reminders. I believe you. The warmth in the answer was slight and dangerous. I looked down at the ledger. Your amended documents have done their work for today, and my presence. That depends why you remain. He was silent for several seconds. Around us, the evening library continued. Miss Pike copying, Mrs. Lyle reading in the back room, Bet sharpening pencils badly, Clara labeling cards, Mrs. Valancourt pretending not to watch, Miss Tresham choosing not to go home yet. At last he said, I remain because the room is open. That is not an answer. No, he said, it is the public one. I closed the ledger. Then the private one should wait until the room no longer needs me. I agree. Again, no argument. This new restraint might undo me faster than his earlier errors. The room needed me until nearly 10. Mrs. Lyle left safely through the west passage with Harold's cousin at the corner. Miss Pike departed with paid work wrapped beneath her arm, and Miss Tresham's maid walking the first street beside her. Bet and Clara left together, laughing too loudly from relief and youth. Mrs. Valancourt was carried out in triumph by Harold, who looked as if he had aged 3 years in 2 days and been promoted morally without consultation. Aunt Mercer took Miss Tresham away after extracting a promise that I would dine her lodgings before people begin thinking poverty is required for virtue. At last the library emptied. Not fully. It never did. A room keeps the shapes of those who needed it. But the people were gone. I locked the front door, checked the west passage, pulled the new bell cord once, and heard its small clear answer from the repair room. When I returned, Mr. Tresham stood by the desk with his hat in hand. You stayed, I said. For the private answer, if you will hear, I moved behind the desk because habit is a stubborn guardian. Then, after a moment, I came around it again. No, I said. Not from there. His eyes followed me. I stopped beside the charity table stack, where the dull volume on female education still lay waiting to be reshelved. Say it plainly. He drew a breath. I admire you, he said. That is a dangerous beginning. Men admire women most safely when they do not have to alter anything around them. I know. Do you? Wes. He looked toward the west door, then the shelves, then the ledger. I admired you first when I did not know your name. That was easy. A mind in slips asked nothing of my courage. Then I came here with authority and learned that the same mind belonged to a woman whose work required me to change my conduct, my conclusions, my language, and the room I thought I controlled. He looked back at me. I did some of that badly. I will likely do more badly. Almost certainly his moved. You are merciless. I am experienced. That too. His voice gentled, though it did not weaken. I cannot ask you to trust me because I spoke properly in one assembly room or because documents now say what they should have said before. I can ask only for the chance to continue being corrected where I am wrong and to stand where standing has a cost. All the library seemed very quiet. Outside, Bath moved in carriage wheels and distant voices. Inside, the shelves held books full of roads, sermons, foolish opinions, sensible women, and private slips that had once been safer than faces. I said, "What exactly are you asking?" His answer came without ornament. To court you openly, when you are ready to permit it. Not as settlement for trouble caused. Not as gratitude. Not as protection for your name. And not in a way that makes the library secondary to my convenience. My hands tightened at my sides. A sensible woman would have asked for time. I was sensible. I asked anyway. And if society says your judgment was compromised before the evidence began, then I will answer that my judgment improved because I listened to a woman I already respected. That sounds almost rehearsed. It is. I have been improving the sentence for 3 hours. I laughed then. Softly, unexpectedly. Entirely, his face changed with the sound, as it had before, only now he did not look away as if caught in something improper. He let himself receive it. That was dangerous, too. I looked at the desk, the repaired de Bellepool, the ledger with his real name now drying in ink. I will not be managed. I will not make the library respectable by narrowing who may need it. I will not have Larkspur turned into a sentimental secret we are ashamed of or a romantic proof we are obliged to perform. And if I say no tonight, then I ask again only if invited. That answer was the one that did it, not the admiration, the public stance, not even the documents, though I valued those more than any bouquet. It was the respect for refusal. A woman who runs a room of doors learns which men believe those door is a challenge and which understand it as an answer. I stepped closer, not into his arms. Not yet. Close enough that the spatiness ceased to be administrative. Yes, I said. He did not move. To which question, he asked. Carefuriating man. Into courtship, I said. Not to certainty, not to surrender, not to being tittied into your life like a corrected account. Courtship. His eyes warmed. Courtship, he repeated. You may begin by returning all stolen slips. They were not stolen. They were removed without entry. That is a severe classification. A safe one. He reached into his coat and drew out 2 folded blue slips. The ones he had carried through more than one mistake and one public defense. He placed them on my palm. His fingers did not close over mine. He waited. I could have stepped back. I did not. I folded my hand around the slips and said, you may borrow them again later. His smile arrived slowly. Not large, not easy. Better. Under my own name. Entered in the ledger. Always. He took my hand then, because I allowed it, and lifted it not to his mouth, but between us, where both of us could see the choice. His thumb rested once against my glove, warm through the thin leather. No kiss yet. That would come when it came, not because an ending required it, but because permission had ripened honestly enough to bear one. From the repair room, the new bell rang. We both turned. Then I laughed again, because of course. A room built for need has no respect for private timing. Mr. Tresham released my hand immediately. Duty, he said. Mine first. Oh, we went together to the West Passage. Book clutched to her chest. She was frightened, embarrassed, and trying very hard to look as if she had arrived only to return a volume at an odd hour. I opened the door. Come in, I said. Behind me, Mr. Tresham stepped back, making space rather than taking it. That was how the evening truly settled. Not with a grand declaration. Not with society made pure or danger banished or every wrong man properly crushed. Underhill would still fight. Pike would still bargain. Lady Sefton would still call caution kindness when it suited her. The committee would still prefer smaller truths whenever possible. But Fenwick's remained open. The West Bell worked. The lease held. The subscriber ledger stayed private. Miss Tresham was no one's collateral. The women who came after dark still had a room. And Gabriel Tresham, no longer Larkspur except in the shelves where old slips slept inside returned books, stood behind me learning the difference between guarding a door and owning it. For now, that was more than enough.